Chapter 971. Speechless replied, I've said it before, I'm here to assist you. The Golden River Kuan Windriding banner was a greeting gift. You can trust me. If I'm plotting against you, there are many opportunities to destroy the multitude star territory. After saying this, he bowed to Zhou Xuanji again. Zhou Xuanji said meaningfully, then help me remove these marks. There was no end to the space-time turbulence. He had no idea how many golden seals the evil emperor's men had left behind. Speechless did not refuse. He raised his right hand and countless beams of light flew out from his palm. Boom, 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 one by one the invisible golden imprints were struck, and after appearing they immediately dissipated. Zhou Xuanji could not help but think to himself, this fellow was so sensitive to these golden marks. Could it be that he was related to the evil emperor? When he thought of this he became even more wary of Wordless. He flew ahead without saying a word, and Zhou Xuanji closely followed behind. 10 hours later Wu Yin finally managed to remove all of the golden marks. They flew for a very long time. Zhou Xuanji felt quite shocked in his heart. With so many golden marks, how many people had the evil emperor sent? The scariest thing was that he hadn't noticed it before. It seemed that he couldn't just focus on cultivation in the future. He had to be more vigilant. He immediately created dozens of doppelgangers. The doppelgangers quickly flew in different directions and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Speechless squinted his eyes and said, Your clone is not bad. In terms of stability it's rare. Zhou Xuanji could not deny it. Let's go, it's time to go back, he said, waving his hand. The two of them teleported back to the astral field. After returning to the Star Hall, Zhou Xuanji began to think about how to deal with the dual pressure from the evil emperor and Cardinal Heaven. Right now the two overlords seemed to be competing with each other, but in reality, it was just a stalemate. Either side had the ability to free up a hand to destroy him. He took out the Lesser Supreme Sword and summoned Little Supreme Sword. Demonic Emperor. When Little Sovereign heard this, his eyelids twitched wildly and he fell into silence. Looking at his expression, it was clear that he was also filled with reverence for the Demonic Emperor. By the way, what is the Imperishable Realm? I have a subordinate named Wu Yin who said that I have a chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with the evil emperor and step into the Imperishable Realm. Zhou Xuanji asked. Seeing his expression, Zhou Xuanji knew that he could not think of a solution, so it was better to ask something else. Little Sovereign's eyes widened as he asked in astonishment, How can you step into the immortal realm? What did you get? He had only been asleep for a short period of time, and this kid had made such a huge leap? Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, I created a divine ability. As he finished speaking, he took out the divine sword of coercion. His eyes were instantly filled with purple light, and everything became silent. Little Sovereign was stunned and inexplicably creeped out. Even though Zhou Xuanji had not acted yet, he felt like he was going to die. The Hall of Stars fell into a strange atmosphere. Little Sovereign gulped and cautiously asked, What is this magical power called? Absolute Sword Emperor. Zhou Xuanji said with a pleased smile. He had not truly used the Sword Emperor Absolute technique because if he did, it would definitely be a disaster. Good name. It suits you very well. Little Sovereign exclaimed in admiration. The purple light in Zhou Xuanji's eyes faded, and the murderous atmosphere disappeared. He took a deep breath and said, The Imperishable Realm is a realm that surpasses the Grand Supreme Realm. It's said that it's impossible to break through that realm with just cultivation. It requires great fortune or great divine ability to break through it with force. Above Grand Supreme. Zhou Xuanji thought about it. The evil emperor must be an existence that surpassed the Grand Sovereign. Otherwise, how could he compete with a Cardinal Heaven? However, he didn't know how the realms above the Grand Supreme were divided. Little Sovereign reminded him, You better behave for the time being. Otherwise your enemies will not just be Cardinal Heaven. Zhou Xuanji nodded. Some plans didn't need to be publicized. 800 years later, Zhou Xuanji began preaching for the Stars domain. Everyone had been looking forward to this preaching for a long time. Zhou Xuanji's preaching had already become famous in the North Infinity long ago. However, most of the powerful cultivators didn't take it seriously. Those ancient existences wouldn't even guess that he was preaching the ancestral voice. Not to mention the North Infinity, only the ancestral Buddha would preach in all directions. When Zhou Xuanji uttered the first note, everyone's soul trembled. All the realms turned silent. Everyone began to listen to Zhou Xuanji's preaching seriously. No matter how high one's cultivation was, they would quickly fall into a state of epiphany when they heard the ancestral voice. In a pavilion, Wordless stood in front of the window sill, looking at the starry sky in the distance. He mumbled, "Ancestral voice, how many great opportunities are you hiding?" A rare look of shock appeared in his eyes. Obviously, he didn't expect Zhou Xuanji to know the ancestral voice at all. Next, he meditated on the spot and began to enjoy the ancestral voice. He wouldn't refuse an opportunity that was delivered to his doorstep. This preaching lasted for a long time. Zhou Xuanji only ended the preaching after making sure that every creature had gained something. The Sword Emperor is merciful. All of the creatures of the court realm began to shout these words. They were extremely excited. After listening to this sermon, all of the problems they faced in their cultivation were easily solved. Most of the creatures even broke through as a result. It could be said that the entire world was celebrating. In their opinion, such a magical preaching must have consumed a lot of their cultivation. Therefore they were very moved and worshipped Zhou Xuanji even more. Zhou Xuanji was about to rest in the hall when Shen Yanxing barged in. She arrived before Zhou Xuanji in one step and asked, "What's the origin of that kid without a mouth?" Her expression was serious. Her eyes were sharp and filled with hidden anger. "What's wrong with him?" Zhou Xuanji asked in confusion. Although wordless was mysterious, he shouldn't be a match for Shen Yanxing. Shen Yanxing gritted her teeth and said, "He has the extreme Dao Qi. He is from the East Infinity royal family." East Infinity? Zhou Xuanji frowned. He had already offended the Northern Endless Evil Emperor and the Western Endless Ancient Geniuses, and now he had also offended the Eastern Endless Ancient Geniuses? Shen Yanxing sighed. "I didn't notice it before, but when you were preaching he was cultivating and leaked the aura of the extreme path. The Eastern Infinity royal family are all monsters. You've been targeted by them. You're in big trouble." She blamed herself. It was normal that Zhou Xuanji did not recognize him, but she had experienced so much in the endless universe. Why did she not notice him earlier? "He said he's here to help me. He might not be an enemy, right?" Zhou Xuanji said hesitantly. Although he had been in the limelight recently, he had not yet reached the level of an overlord who could threaten the world. "Help you. That is to win you over. When you grow up, if you don't choose a side, the Eastern Endless Imperial family will definitely make a move against you." Shen Yanxing frowned. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "Since you said that you will grow up, then there is still some time, right? Don't panic." Shen Yanxing came in such a hurry that he was shocked. Hearing this, Shen Yanxing felt that it made sense. The reputation of the Eastern Infinity royal family was too great, which made her panic. She tried to calm down and said, "You are right, but we must keep an eye on that guy. His cultivation is not very strong, but the Eastern Infinity royal family behind him is a family that has been passed down since the ancient sovereign era. We must not provoke them." Zhou Xuanji was surprised and said, "According to what you said, isn't the Eastern Infinity the strongest endless?" Chapter 972. It can't be said to be the strongest. It can only be said that it has the deepest foundation, Shen Yanxing replied, shaking her head. Zhou Xuanji was even more surprised when he heard this. This Eastern Infinity isn't the strongest. Doesn't this mean that Northern Infinity is the weakest? Shen Yanxing said seriously, "It's difficult to tell who is strong and who is weak. It's impossible for the weak to survive for so long. Today's 4 Infinity is more powerful than all living beings imagine. The 4 overlords have the potential to compete for the post-ancient sovereign 3 heavens. It's just that the world is advocating their ancestors." This wasn't the first time Zhou Xuanji had heard such words. There were always some powerhouses who were promoting the current generation. Zhou Xuanji listened to it, but whether he believed it or not was another matter. "Since he is already here, let's take things as they come. You stay in the star's domain and help me keep an eye on him," Zhou Xuanji said with a smile, staring at Shen Yanxing. Shen Yanxing rolled her eyes at him and said meaningfully, "I'm not helping you for free. If you ask me like this, you will owe me more and more. Understand?" Zhou Xuanji shrugged, smiling but didn't say anything. Shen Yanxing smiled and turned to leave. After she left the star's palace, Zhou Xuanji's smile froze. Cardinal Heaven, Evil Emperor, Eastern Infinity royal family, it's really a gathering of stars. Zhou Xuanji raised the corner of his mouth and murmured, "You want to use me as a chess piece? If the chess piece is too big, it will crush me to death." He didn't feel any pressure. On the contrary, he felt that the current situation was very good. Wordless came to assist him. Didn't it mean that the Eastern Infinity royal family wanted to support him? Then he would have one more bargaining chip when facing the evil emperor in Cardinal Heaven. He took out the 2 faded fate pearls and continued to comprehend. Undying realm. What kind of realm is this? In the starry sky filled with black qi, countless meteorites were flying like sand in the wind. A row of mysterious existences in black robes stood in the air. There were a total of 17 figures. Their heads were wisps of smoke, making it impossible to distinguish their true faces. They were looking up in the same direction. There was a beam of light with thunder and lightning. There was a huge figure vaguely in the beam of light. It was like a world-destroying demon god. It was incomparably majestic, and its terrifying aura filled the universe with pressure. The star's domain has an undying existence that surpasses Great Sovereign? A hoarse voice rang out, its tone cold. A black-robed man replied, "Yes, that person is a mortal ancestor god. She has the aura of the graveyard of gods. All these years there has been a mortal ancestor god hunting Grand Supremes. Maybe it's her." The black-robed man at the side added, "Not only that, there is also the extreme Dao Qi in the multitude star domain, and the Eastern Infinity Royal family is also within it. It's best if we don't interfere and let the Cardinal Heaven Masters deal with the multitude star domain, thereby angering the Eastern Infinity Royal family." The others followed suit. "That's right, we can use someone else to do our dirty work. The Eastern Endless Imperial family has always disliked Cardinal Heaven experts. Hunyuan Heaven also wants to intervene in the boundless north. We are surrounded by enemies, and this is our chance. Speaking of which, it's strange. What kind of background does the Sword Emperor have? Is it because he's the Kunlun Origin Court's sovereign that he could attract the Eastern Endless Imperial family? We also have a Kunlun Origin Court supremacy under us. Why don't we send him to persuade the Sword Emperor and rope him over to His Majesty's side?" The black-robed men discussed among themselves. The silhouette in the beam of light listened quietly and did not speak. After they quietened down, the silhouette in the beam of light said, "Send the Kunlun Origin Court supremacy. You will arrange everything. This emperor is very tired and needs to rest. In the future, do not disturb this emperor if there is no especially important information. Understand?" A murderous aura emanated from the beam of light, causing the black-robed men to sway continuously. They immediately bowed and disappeared from where they were. Ever since Zhou Xuanji knew that Wu Yin came from the Eastern Infinity Royal family, he had been talking to Wu Yin intentionally or unintentionally. He asked about how to govern the multitude star domain. Wu Yin was very smart and could always think of many strategies for him. Zhou Xuanji passed down the strategies that he thought were good and implemented them immediately. From beginning to end, he did not promote Wu Yin at all. Speechless did not have any complaints. He looked like a loyal and honest person. This day, Daozong Xian came to visit him. The two gathered in the multitude star palace. Looking at him, who was high above, Daozong Xian sighed and said, "I lost." "How many elites did you send?" Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile. "Just me alone," Daozong Xian said straightforwardly. He was the most powerful being in the Dragon Follower domain. His loss meant that the Dragon Follower domain lost. "Tell me about it." Zhou Xuanji maintained his smile. He didn't find it strange. After all, it was a Cardinal Heaven base that attracted countless believers to worship it. Even though the Cardinal Heaven was domineering, there was still an endless stream of living beings. They thought that joining the Cardinal Heaven would grant them eternal life. If they could not win, they would join. Serve the Cardinal Heaven. No matter how brutal the Cardinal Heaven was, they would not kill until he was the only one left in Northern Infinity. Everyone knew that the Cardinal Heaven's true goal was to create a great era like the primeval sovereign era. Any greatness needed to be revered. Daozong Xian began to talk about the specific situation of the base. It was a gigantic island, one that was even bigger than the Great Thousand World. A Cardinal Heaven statue stood on the island, which contained a strand of the Cardinal Heaven's consciousness. Daozong Xian was defeated by that strand of consciousness. Fortunately, it was just a strand of consciousness, or else he would not have been able to escape. According to his observation, many void beasts and powerful cultivators were hiding on the island. There were restrictions outside the island, and only great sovereigns could enter. Even if one entered, one would not be able to escape without the cultivation of the 7 courts' great sovereigns. There were no rules on the island. In other words, the island was a training ground. Those who entered had to fight continuously if they wanted to survive. Those who knew this secret would be killed by the Cardinal Heaven's consciousness if they had any intention of betraying. If not for Daozong Xian's powerful cultivation, he would not have been able to escape. "You stayed there for 100 years?" Zhou Xuanji asked with a strange expression. Looking at Daozong Xian's expression, it was hard to imagine that he had been through all this. Zhou Xuanji thought that he would be back soon. Daozong Xan nodded and said, all in all, if that island was released, the Dragon Follower domain, Star's domain, and all the nearby domains would be flattened. He still felt a lingering fear when he mentioned this. Even the great sovereigns of the 9 courts were so scared. It showed how terrifying that island was. Zhou Xuanji asked in astonishment, if so, what is the cardinal heaven waiting for? Daozong Xan shook his head. He was also confused about this. Zhou Xuanji immediately sent a telepathic message to Wu Yan. Soon Wu Yan came to the Star's Palace. After hearing about it, Wu Yan said, it should be some kind of formation. As far as I know, there is more than one island like this. They are scattered across the endless worlds. Daozong Xan sized him up and was curious about who this brat was. Sword Emperor, this is your serendipity. Don't you know how to absorb the sovereign's divine power and have mastered a speed divine ability? You can go there, Wu Yan said meaningfully. Chapter 973. Wu Yan's suggestion caused Zhou Xuanji to narrow his eyes. It was not that he had not thought of this, but Wu Yan's suggestion surprised him. This kid knew him very well. Daozong shook his head and said, no, that place is too dangerous. I suggest the Sword Emperor not go. He was not trying to persuade Zhou Xuanji sincerely. It was just that he and Zhou Xuanji were in the same boat. If anything happened to Zhou Xuanji, the Dragon Follower domain would not have a good ending either. He had already defied the will of Cardinal Heaven. Even if he surrendered, Cardinal Heaven would not let him off. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, Dao brother, you can go back first. Pay more attention to the spatial turbulence around you. Previously, I discovered that the evil emperor's people were secretly setting up restrictions. Demonic Emperor. Daozong Xan was startled. He immediately bowed and left. He was also afraid of being targeted by the evil emperor. After he left, he looked at Zhou Xuanji speechlessly and said, such a lowly person is not fit to be on your side. Just subdue him. Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile, subdue? Can you help me? This kid was really arrogant. The Dragon Pursuit domain was bigger than the Star's domain. All right. Speechless agreed immediately. Having heard this, Zhou Xuanji was quite surprised. Could this brat defeat the Supreme of the 9 Halls? Give Shen Yinxing to me, Wu Yan said seriously. Zhou Xuanji's smile froze. He felt that he had been played. The two of them stared at each other and even the air seemed to freeze. Speechless seemed to feel that it was inappropriate. He said hesitantly, if it's just me, I'll need time. I'll have to integrate into the Draconic domain first before making a plan. Go, Zhou Xuanji said with a smile without hesitation. He had already planned to head to a huge training island in the Cardinal Heaven. Before that, he would feel more at ease if he could send Wu Yan out. Nodding silently, Zhang Xian left. Zhou Xuanji summoned Shen Yinxing again. After Shen Yinxing came to the Star's Hall, she asked impatiently, what's the matter? Zhou Xuanji told her what had happened and that he was going to the massive training island. After I leave, I'll leave the astral domain to you. Wait for my return. Zhou Xuanji stared at Shen Yinxing and said with a serious face. Shen Yinxing frowned and said, are you sure you want to go there? I know that place. Those who can survive there are all ruthless characters. Those islands are the backup of the Cardinal Heaven experts and are also a deterrent to the various domains. Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile, what do you think are the chances of me becoming more powerful after I go in? Shen Yinxing began to ponder. She thought back to what Zhou Xuanji had encountered before and felt that this was an opportunity for Zhou Xuanji. But what she was most annoyed about was that this suggestion came from Wordless. If he succeeded this time, would Zhou Xuanji be even more gullible in the future? That was what worried her the most. She did not have a good impression of the Eastern Endless Royal family. Don't worry, I know what to do, Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. He understood what Shen Yinxing was worried about. She wasn't afraid that he would die, but she was unhappy and speechless. No matter what, Zhou Xuanji had to go. Apart from becoming stronger, he also wanted to learn more about the training island. He felt that Cardinal Heaven definitely had other motives for establishing such an island. The more ostentatious a Cardinal Heaven expert was, the more he wanted to hide something. All right, you're on your own. Come back early, Shen Yinxing said, shaking her head. This kid is always so restless. His growth speed is already very exaggerated, but he always wants to continue to grow stronger quickly. When are you leaving? She asked. Zhou Xuanji got up and replied, now. Kunlun Origin Court, Zhensu Court Realm and Zhanlanting Realm were all in his soul. As long as the people he really cared about were following him, he wouldn't have any worries. In his opinion, Leaving his family in the star's domain was far safer than following him. After all, he had the spirit void state. No matter what danger he encountered, he could escape alive. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Zhou Xuanji left the star's domain. Sitting on the legendary sword throne, he shuttled through the space-time tunnel. Ever since he intertwined the legendary swords into a throne, he had liked this legendary sword throne very much. Before leaving, he had already obtained the memories from the spies. He could accurately find the location of the training island. He let the legendary sword throne fly on its own while he played with the two fated fate pearls. Ever since he created the Sword Emperor Absolute, he wanted to taste the mysterious power of the fated fate pearls. The Sword Emperor Absolute could be even more powerful. Zhou Xuanji dared to go to the training island because he wanted to test the power of the Sword Emperor Absolute. In the star's domain, he couldn't use the Sword Emperor Absolute. 2 hours later, he jumped out of the space-time turbulence. The void in front of him was filled with turbid gas, and a boundless giant island that looked like a terrifying giant scorpion was entrenched there. It was obscured by the gray fog and it was partly visible. Zhou Xuanji could already sense the powerful restrictive aura, which filled the void with pressure. Fortunately, he had trained his physique to the limit when he learned the spirit void state, so he was not afraid of this pressure. A layer of silver sword radiance emanated from his body. Next, he who was sitting on the legendary sword throne turned into a shooting star and broke through the restrictive barrier, charging into the training island. On the massive island, thunderclouds billowed. The mountains on the ground were undulating. This place was also shrouded in fog, covering the sky and the sun. It was extremely gloomy, as though demons were hiding in every corner. Zhou Xuanji stopped and sensed the murderous aura coming from all directions. He raised his brow slightly. It's purgatory indeed. He mumbled to himself, his eyes filled with anticipation. He spread out his divine sense and soon he sensed horrifying figures. Some were humanoid, some were as massive as mountains, and some were like demon gods walking aimlessly between the heavens and the earth. Zhou Xuanji continued flying. He had no destination and only wanted to look around first. Soon he saw a man with messy hair walking on a hill. This man was half naked and his muscles were like steel. His pants were torn and he swayed as he walked as though he was severely injured. Zhou Xuanji looked down at him and asked, "Are you still conscious?" The man stopped and said slowly, "I'm Du Shen. I'm Du Shen. I'm Du Shen." Zhou Xuanji shook his head. He was crazy indeed. After the thought, he continued to move forward. He wanted to find someone who was conscious to understand the situation here. But just when he flew over, Du Shen suddenly turned around and leaped toward him. He was extremely fast. Clang. Zhou Xuanji blocked Du Shen's fist with a backhand slash. Both of them were powerful and the space around them twisted violently. It was on the verge of collapsing. Zhou Xuanji glanced over and saw that Du Shen's eyes were extremely ferocious. There was a face in this guy's pupils. It was not Zhou Xuanji's but someone else's. It was a horrifying and blurry face. Anyone who saw him would instinctively be afraid. But if one looked closely, one would not be able to see his face clearly. Du Shen laughed viciously and kicked at Zhou Xuanji, unleashing a torrential barrage of attacks. Zhou Xuanji held his sword with one hand and easily blocked all of his punches and kicks with his back to Du Shen. Chapter 974. Poison Centipede attacked ferociously, but he could not hurt Zhou Xuanji. This made him even more irritable. "I will tear you into pieces," he roared at the top of his lungs. His body suddenly expanded, and needle-like hairs grew out from the surface of his body. His hair grew even faster. His fingernails grew as long as 10 blades. Zhou Xuanji's eyes focused. He held the suppressive legendary sword in a reverse grip, and his eyes beamed with a violet radiance. Boom! A sword light exploded from his body like a circle that expanded and swept across the surroundings. Poison Centipede was swept by the sword light and shattered into pieces. The dense fog between the heavens and the earth was shredded, and mountains were crushed. Everything within a radius of 100 miles was turned into nothingness. Sword Emperor Extinction. He simply used this trump card divine ability to kill his enemy easily. He waved his left hand and Poison Centipede's soul appeared in his hand. He stared into Poison Centipede's eyes and hypnotized him. The exterminating divine eyes worked wonders. He used illusions to make Poison Centipede lose himself. After that, Zhou Xuanji began searching through his memories. But after a long while he found nothing. This guy's mind was like a blank piece of paper with nothing in it. Zhou Xuanji frowned and crushed Poison Centipede's soul. He continued ahead, wanting to find a rational creature so that he could quickly understand this massive training island. Ever since he entered the island, a murderous aura surrounded him. At first, he thought it was because there were too many living creatures, but now he sensed that something was wrong. Although this murderous aura was sometimes strong and sometimes weak, the essence of the murderous aura was the same. It came from the same person or thing. Zhou Xuanji felt that this murderous aura might be the key to this massive training island. It could make living creatures lose their minds and turn them into killing machines. He looked calm, but he was actually on high alert, just in case the murderous aura invaded his mind. After flying for a while, he encountered another person and he raised his brow slightly. This person was Poison Centipede. This guy was staggering on the vast land, exactly the same as the previous scene. I'm Poison Centipede. The same scene, the same murmur. Zhou Xuanji looked down at him and was sure that it was not an illusion. Could it be a twin? Or a clone? Zhou Xuanji thought as he brought Poison Centipede before him and absorbed his sovereign's divine energy. This fellow did indeed possess the divine power of a supreme being. After he finished absorbing the Poison Centipede, he destroyed it and continued on his journey. Not long after, he encountered another Poison Centipede, who was still walking on the ground in a daze. Zhou Xuanji, who was sitting on the throne, became extremely interested in this phenomenon. Every time he encountered a Poison Centipede, he would grab it and absorb its supreme god force. That was all. He encountered more and more poisonous centipedes, and his cultivation kept increasing. He was even more curious about the identity of Poison Toad. Could it be that Poison Centipede was a clone? Endless? That's fine too. It just so happened that he needed supreme god force. Half a year later, Zhou Xuanji absorbed another Poison Centipede. He had already absorbed over 10,000 Poison Centipedes. Apart from the Poison Centipede, he also encountered other creatures, some strong, some weak. In this place, the weakest was a Grand Supreme. He increasingly felt that Poison Centipede's status on this training island was very special, because he had no other living beings that would repeat. During this period of time, all the living beings he encountered had no memories. They were all muddle-headed like walking corpses. Until one day he found a dilapidated Taoist temple. Its roof was broken and overgrown with weeds. There was a strange sound of knocking on a wooden fish in the temple. Zhou Xuanji landed in front of the Taoist temple. He gently pushed open the wooden door and saw an old monk inside. Interesting. Why didn't an old monk build a temple? Old senior, how should I address you? He asked. The old monk did not open his eyes. Yuan Qing, he replied while knocking on the wooden fish. Yuan Qing? Zhou Xuanji raised his brow. There was no such person in the North Limitless, or at least he had never heard of him. My name is Zhou Xuanji. I'm new here and have yet to encounter a cardinal heaven. I feel that this place is very chaotic. What's the reason? Zhou Xuanji continued to ask. His tone was relaxed, neither aggressive nor cowardly. He could not see through Yuan Cheng's cultivation. This guy was very powerful. Yuan Cheng even gave him a sense of unpredictability, like divine pinching star. A cardinal heaven is at work. You have already become a part of this ill-fated fate. You are very unfortunate. Give up struggling. You will soon be captured by the cardinal heaven's murderous desire and become a puppet, Yuan Cheng said calmly. Zhou Xuanji locked onto the words cardinal heaven's murderous desire. So, the murderous desire that pervaded the heavens and earth came from the cardinal heaven. Could it be that strand of will? He fell into deep thought. If he could control that strand of will, could he control this massive training island? Put away your thoughts. It's useless. Even if you escape, the cardinal heaven will hunt you down and never give up, Yuan Cheng continued. Then what is your identity? What are you doing? Zhou Xuanji asked. Yuan Cheng replied, my identity is not important. I'm waiting for death. So straightforward. Zhou Xuanji hesitated. Should he attack Yuan Cheng? It seemed that he would not be able to learn more from Yuan Cheng. He thought about it and chose to give up. This old guy was not simple. He would not touch him for now and check out the other situation first. Zhou Xuanji shook his head and left. Just when he stepped out of the Taoist temple, he heard footsteps behind him. He looked back and saw that Yuan Cheng had caught up with him. He was still knocking on the wooden fish. Yuan Cheng opened his eyes and said softly, Benefactor, I suddenly feel that we are fated. How about I accompany you? Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile, aren't you waiting for death? Let me wait for death too. Why are you following me? To seek death together? He was on guard. Could this old guy be plotting something? I thought so at first, but when you turned around just now, I had a different premonition, Yuan Qing said with a smile. There's a calamity in the boundless universe. The old and the new are replacing each other. On the eve of glory, I came here to find a master, but I have already given up on my desire for him. Zhou Xuanji said with a smile that did not seem like a smile. Not only have you given up, but you can't escape either, right? Yuan Qing replied with a smile. Yes. But if I can meet a new master who can bring me out, I shouldn't give up, right? Zhou Xuanji smiled. He turned into a stream of sword light and disappeared into the horizon. Yuan Qing followed after him while knocking on the wooden fish. The two of them turned into two streams of rainbow light and shuttled between the heavens and the earth, piercing through layers of clouds and mist with unstoppable momentum. Zhou Xuanji smiled and disappeared into thin air with God's supreme speed. Yuan Qing opened his eyes wide suddenly. His gaze was incredibly sharp. Apparently he was stunned by Zhou Xuanji's God's supreme speed. Zhou Xuanji thought that he had already shaken off Yuan Qing. He looked back and opened his eyes wide in shock. Yuan Qing was chasing after him relentlessly. Benefactor, you are not bad, Yuan Qing said with a smile. Because of his small eyes he looked like a sly old fox. Zhou Xuanji gritted his teeth and entered God's supreme mode straight away, disappearing before Yuan Qing again. Yuan Qing opened his eyes wide again. This. Chapter 975. After entering spiritless mode, Zhou Xuanji directly jumped out of the training island. He heaved a sigh of relief when he managed to shake off Yuan Qing. If this old fellow could even keep up with the spiritless state, that would be too much of a blow. With that thought he flew back to the training island. Not long after he entered, Yuan Qing found him. What divine ability did you use just now? Yuan Qing asked in shock. His body was trembling, and it was obvious that there was an answer in his heart that he did not dare to believe. Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and smiled. Didn't you guess it already? Yuan Qing took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. He said with a trembling voice, delirious state? Zhou Xuanji nodded, looking calm and at ease. Thump. Yuan Qing knelt on the ground and cupped his fists. Yuan Qing is willing to acknowledge you as my master and follow you for all eternity. Zhou Xuanji was stunned. So casual? I understand the boundless universe very well, and I'm well versed in both the past and present. I once encountered a setback in my cultivation, but I actually have the foundation of the imperishable realm. If you accept me, I can definitely become your right-hand man. Yuan Qing said seriously. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow. He did not expect this old guy to be so powerful. Could it be that he was boasting? If he was that strong, why couldn't he escape? Even the heart of the Taoist scripture can go out, so why can't an undying realm expert like you? It's not that I can't go out, Yuan Qing said helplessly. I just want to explore the secrets of this giant island and see if there are any Cardinal Heaven prodigies who dare to disobey the Cardinal Heaven experts. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and said, then jump out and let me see. Yuan Qing frowned. He immediately leaped out of the training island. In an instant, thunder and lightning intersected, and the rolling black clouds in the sky surged violently, as if the sky was collapsing. After about 5 breaths of time, a figure pierced through the sea of clouds and came crashing down. Countless thunderbolts interweaved on his body. It was Yuan Qing. The surface of his body was charred black, and he was in a sorry state. He landed in front of Zhou Xuanji and said, how is it? I didn't lie, right? Zhou Xuanji asked in confusion, why did lightning strike you? Yuan Qing said helplessly, I've been targeted by the will of the Cardinal Heaven. He pulled himself together and looked at Zhou Xuanji again, his eyes flashing with a brilliant light. No matter how miserable it was before, he had finally found the master he wanted. The person in front of him had a pure soul, an outstanding cultivation, and was proficient in the spiritless state that grand sovereigns couldn't grasp. He was definitely a peerless genius. Moreover, he was a top-notch existence among the peerless geniuses throughout the ages. He saw something on Zhou Xuanji's body that was difficult to see with the naked eye and divine sense. Alright, follow me first. I want to absorb the sovereign divine energy of the creatures here. Take me to some powerful great sovereigns, Zhou Xuanji said, nodding with a calm expression. Yuan Qing nodded. He didn't think it was inappropriate. All the creatures that came here wanted to follow a Cardinal Heaven expert, so their deaths were not to be regretted. Putting aside morality and righteousness, life and death was a very common thing in the boundless universe. After that, under Yuan Qing's lead, Zhou Xuanji began hunting the great sovereigns on the training island. In a dark and gloomy cave, there was a continuous heavy panting sound, as if a terrifying beast was hiding inside. He saw an existence with a snake's body and a human head lying in the water. The water wasn't deep, so it couldn't cover his entire body. His body was covered in countless scales. Half of them were about to fall off, but they were still attached to his flesh. He looked at the entrance of the cave and said with a cold smile, "This aura? Another delicious guy is coming." Whoosh, a gust of cold wind swept out from the entrance of the cave. Next, a woman appeared in front of him. This woman had a graceful figure and was shrouded in black chi. Only her cold and elegant face could be seen. Her long blood-red hair danced wildly in the wind, making her look like a ghost. She stared at the snake-bodied monster and said, "Han Flood Dragon, the sovereign of the Kunlun origin court is here. Do you want to eat him?" "That aura belongs to the sovereign of the Kunlun origin court?" Han Flood Dragon laughed sinisterly. "Yeah, if you eat him, you can become the sovereign of the Kunlun origin court and be reborn," the blood-red-haired woman said with a nod, a cold glint flickering in her eyes. Han Flood Dragon stared at her and slowly arched his snake body as he said with a smile, "You are so good to me? Spiritual assault, you aren't planning something, right? You and I are both stray dogs who came to worship a cardinal heaven. Will you help me?" Boom. He immediately charged toward the blood-red-haired woman called Spiritual Assault. Spiritual Assault's body flickered and moved under the thunderclouds. She turned to look at the rolling mountains below and said with a frown, gritting her teeth, "So stupid." Just when she finished speaking, the mountain below exploded, and Han Flood Dragon charged toward her, swaying his snake tail. The two immediately clashed and unleashed all kinds of divine abilities. The heavens and earth shook, and the mountains and forests were constantly bombarded. The lightning in the sky interweaved toward them. Far away, Zhou Xuanji was absorbing the sovereign's divine energy from a great sovereign. Yuan Cheng was beside the legendary sword throne. The two looked up at the horizon at the same time. "Not bad, a good target," Zhou Xuanji said with a soft smile. On the training island, any great sovereign who had a consciousness would attack him first, so he had no qualms about absorbing the divine energy. Yuan Cheng said, "That woman is not simple. She might be the evil emperor's subordinate who is here to explore the secrets of the cardinal heaven. I met her before. She's very powerful." "The evil emperor's subordinate?" Zhou Xuanji asked curiously. "This means that there are all kinds of people on this island. There are spies from all kinds of factions?" Yuan Cheng nodded and shook his head. "The evil emperor is indeed powerful, but he's too arrogant. He had to wait for the cardinal heaven to return to its peak before fighting with him. This caused the cardinal heaven to expand unbridledly. If there are more than 10,000 islands like this, the evil emperor will be dead for sure." "What? These islands are not as simple as training soldiers. The cardinal heavens will absorb the souls here. Once they die, they will become nourishment for the cardinal heaven. His real purpose is the same as what you are doing now." "Can't the evil emperor see through it?" "He definitely sees through it, but he doesn't care." Hearing this, Zhou Xuanji was speechless about the evil emperor. How big is this guy's heart? He will be finished sooner or later. Yuan Cheng said meaningfully, "The evil emperor is really powerful. He is qualified to chase after the ancient sovereign. He seems arrogant and conceited, but if he survives this, no one will be able to stop him." Zhou Xuanji became even more curious about the evil emperor. Even someone as reckless as him could make Yuan Cheng praise him endlessly. Just how talented was the evil emperor? Also, they might be waiting for the sovereign serendipity to appear. Legend has it that once the ancient sovereign three heavens battle, the sovereign serendipity will descend, Yuan Cheng continued. Speaking of the sovereign serendipity, his eyes were burning with passion. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "Actually, I'm Hongmeng Heaven. Do you believe me?" Yuan Cheng rolled his eyes at him and shook his wooden fish, saying, "If you are Hongmeng Heaven, I will eat my treasure." Zhou Xuanji smiled and did not reply. "You can just wait to eat your treasures." Chapter 976. Hong Meng Tian is the most mysterious existence in the post-prime sovereign three heavens. His appearance will determine the future. My guess is that Hong Meng Tian's appearance will be earth-shattering, stirring up endless storms in all directions. Yuan Cheng said with a smile, his face full of anticipation. Zhou Xuanji asked mockingly, "Why? Do you worship Hongmeng Heaven?" Yuan Cheng shook his head and said, "There is no one in this world that I can admire. I am only looking forward to the arrival of that period. When that time comes, dragons and snakes will rise everywhere, and the more chaotic the better. I will help you rise from this chaos." Do you want to become an endless overlord? The more he spoke, the more excited he became, and his hands kept knocking on the wooden fish. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "What makes you think you can help me reach that height?" Yuan Cheng smiled until his eyes were squinted. He asked with a smile, "I have my talents and you have your talents. Why can't I?" Zhou Xuanji rolled his eyes. "What abilities do you have?" This old man wasn't as steady and unfathomable as he appeared to be. One could even say that he was a little arrogant. Even the evil emperor wasn't as arrogant as this guy. At the very least, the evil emperor was high up and had the right to look down on everything. What was fate? A nameless old monk dared to say that the world was a chessboard? Zhou Xuanji felt that it was funny. This was even more ridiculous than Zhuge Liang and Longzhong. "Believe me, I will prove myself in the future," Yuan Cheng said in high spirits as if everything was under his control. Zhou Xuanji, who was absorbing the divine power of the great sovereign under his feet, pondered and said, "How about this? You subdue 100 great sovereigns of the 9 halls for me, right on this island. If you can't even do this, how can you help me dominate this place?" When Yuan Cheng heard this, he almost cursed. He suppressed his embarrassment and said, "But everyone here is a vicious and evil person who wants to prove themselves to a cardinal heaven expert. It's very difficult to poach them, let alone the 9 halls supreme beings. 100 supreme masters of the 9 halls. Have you reached the level of the supreme of the 9 halls?" Zhou Xuanji shrugged his shoulders and said, "If you can't do it, then don't brag. Be honest. The more contributions you make, the more you can brag, understand?" Yuan Cheng scoffed, "Who says I can't? However, there aren't many rational 9 halls great supremes on this island, and most of them are spies from various forces. Would you dare to use them if you roped them in?" He rolled his eyes and continued, "How about this? I'll help you subdue 5 of them. They're definitely the strongest strength under the imperishable realm. With their protection, you'll definitely be able to control a domain." Although the Kunlun Origin Court had a special status, its territory was still too small for a domain. Only by mastering a domain could one truly rise to power. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "Go ahead." He wasn't afraid that Yuan Cheng would play tricks on him. He had the people of the Eastern Boundless Imperial family and Shen Yanxing under him, so it wouldn't matter if he played some tricks. Yuan Cheng nodded and immediately turned around. But after taking a few steps, he turned back and asked hesitantly, "You won't leave me behind, will you?" "I won't," Zhou Xuanji said unpleasantly. Only then did Yuan Cheng feel relieved. He turned around and disappeared into the horizon. Zhou Xuanji continued to absorb the sovereign divine power. After absorbing it, he continued to search for his next target. His targets were all great sovereigns. Tens of thousands of poisonous centipedes and many great sovereigns were enough for him to catch a glimpse of the tail of the great sovereigns of the 7 courts. Time passed quickly. Zhou Xuanji's name gradually spread on the giant training island. Those who were rational knew about his appearance. Most of the creatures who came to the training island wanted to prove themselves and show their potential to the cardinal heavens. They would frantically search for opponents, but no matter how powerful they were, they would still be injured and find a place to hide. Now they were all waiting for Zhou Xuanji to be injured. Not only that, but Zhou Xuanji's identity also spread. The sovereign of the Kunlun Origin Court. This identity made more people want to defeat him. A few years later, some powerful cultivators began to look for Zhou Xuanji. He entered a continuous battle. On this day, his opponent was a great sovereign of the 9 courts. It was the frost dragon that wanted to eat Zhou Xuanji. "Zhou Xuanji, your cultivation has improved a lot." Frost Dragon licked his lips and sneered. Zhou Xuanji sat on the throne of legendary swords and said with a smile, "I've seen you before. Your ugliness is still fresh in my memory." His opponent showed his murderous aura as soon as he came. Naturally, he didn't need to show him any respect. Frost Dragon snorted coldly and pounced at Zhou Xuanji without another word. What gusts of chilly wind were generated by him, forming a pale blue torrent with a majestic aura. Zhou Xuanji raised his imposing might legendary sword and chuckled, "Insect, I have long wanted to deal with you." His eyes beamed with a brilliant purple radiance, illuminating the dark world. He turned the imposing might legendary sword in his hand and pointed it downward. A horrifying sword light burst out and swept across everything. Frost Dragon opened his eyes wide and blocked with his arms instinctively. Boom! Before his arms could reach his head, the sword light had already swept across his body with absolute speed. Such speed was comparable to God's supreme speed. Frost Dragon turned into ashes immediately. A massive amount of Sovereign's divine power flowed into Zhou Xuanji's body, which made him frown. If not for his powerful body, he might have exploded and died. Sword Emperor Absolute. The explosive power of this divine ability was horrifying. It had the Delusion Sword C's divine ability, God's supreme speed, and the divine Rainbow Monarch Dao's will. Especially the imposing might, the legendary sword contained immense pressure that compressed everything with divine power. No one below the imperishable stage could withstand it. As for the imperishable stage, Zhou Xuanji had not tried it yet. It was almost impossible to explode with multiple powers and wills while using God's supreme speed, but the fated Fate Pearl helped him do it. Zhou Xuanji raised his left hand and sucked Frost Dragon's remnant soul into his hand. After the explosion of the Sword Emperor Absolute, Frost Dragon's body was obliterated, and his soul was torn into pieces. Zhou Xuanji absorbed Frost Dragon's remnant soul with his Soul Kunlun sword. A massive amount of divine power flowed in his body, and he began to suppress and absorb it. At this moment an ear-piercing sound came. Zhou Xuanji glanced over and saw that it was Spiritual Strike who fought with Frost Dragon back then. Spiritual Strike was very fast, and she slammed her palm into Zhou Xuanji's body. She smiled, and a wave of insidious energy seeped into Zhou Xuanji's body and wreaked havoc. "You can't keep using your divine ability just now, right?" Spiritual Strike mocked. The Sword Emperor Absolute was powerful indeed. In that instant she felt a chill down her spine. But she was confident that with Zhou Xuanji's cultivation, he would not be able to use the Sword Emperor Absolute consecutively in a short period of time. Just when she finished speaking, her right palm was quickly frozen. The icy power spread along her arm to her entire body. Her expression changed drastically. Instinctively, she wanted to get away from Zhou Xuanji, but it was too late. Zhou Xuanji pierced his sword through her throat and absorbed her sovereign's divine power. "How can it be? You?" Spiritual Strike was in disbelief and could not understand. Zhou Xuanji laughed condescendingly. "The power of rules is useless against me. If you were using pure divine power, it would be easier." The Extermination Sovereign Constitution disregarded all rules. Spiritual Strike immediately turned into a gust of cold wind and disappeared. Zhou Xuanji tossed out the invincible legendary sword and disappeared into the horizon. Chapter 977. The spiritual attack kept moving, its body flashing as if it was teleporting. The surrounding world kept changing. No matter which direction she fled in, the killing intent behind her never disappeared, as if it had already locked onto her and would not stop until she was dead. Is that guy really a Grand Sovereign? This was the first time she had encountered such a powerful Great Supreme. She had no choice but to leave the training island. Zhou Xuanji sensed that her aura had disappeared. He waved his left hand and the non-existence legendary sword flew back into his hand. He continued to suppress the rampaging Supreme God Force in his body. After this battle, he had become much stronger. After a while he moved on. Ever since he parted ways with Yuan Cheng, Zhou Xuanji had not seen him again. He did not know how the old guy was doing. Zhou Xuanji even suspected that this old thing was plotting something. Why did it take so long to subdue 5 Supreme of the 9 courts? He sat on the divine sword throne, thinking as he moved forward. The paragons of the 7 courts are almost there. Once they break through, I should make my move. Zhou Xuanji looked up and saw the manifestation of a cardinal heavens will hidden at the center of the training island. There was a cardinal heaven statue there. He had been thinking about how to secretly take control of this training island. There were countless experts on the island, and all of them were engaged in a killing spree. Their target was the cardinal heaven expert and they kept on killing. If Zhou Xuanji pretended to be the will of a cardinal heaven and ordered them to kill the enemy, wouldn't that be equivalent to holding a powerful weapon? He was not afraid of being found out by a cardinal heaven expert. He only needed to deceive the creatures on the island. At this thought, Zhou Xuanji continued to accelerate. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he arrived in front of the statue of a cardinal heaven expert. This statue was tens of thousands of meters tall and was shrouded in mist. It was extremely mysterious. There were hundreds of figures around the statue. They were meditating and cultivating on the wasteland like ascetic monks. Zhou Xuanji's arrival did not attract their attention. The atmosphere was silent, oppressive, and gloomy. Zhou Xuanji did not disturb those creatures. His gaze was locked onto the god statue. He activated his exterminating divine eyes, wanting to see through the inside of the statue. His exterminating divine eyes had always been evolving, and after injecting his divine sense, he could easily see through the essence of things. However, there was a powerful restriction in the statue of a cardinal heaven expert that isolated his divine consciousness. Don't act recklessly. A familiar voice drifted into his ears. He turned his head and saw 6 figures rushing towards him at high speed. The leader was Yuan Cheng. The other 5 were all 9 Hall's great paragons, and their auras were even stronger than the frost serpent and spirit strike that he had encountered earlier. Yuan Cheng chuckled and said, "My lord, I didn't let you down, did I? These 5 people are all mighty figures who are famous in the north." He began introducing them to Zhou Xuanji. Autarch Crimson Firmament, Autarch Deep Fear, Autarch Solitude, Autarch Vast Guard, Autarch Gale. Let's call them the 5 venerated sword emperors in the future. How about that? Yuan Cheng winked and smiled with a smug expression. Zhou Xuanji looked at the 5 sovereigns and was a little surprised. It was indeed very strong. All 5 of them had ferocious looks in their eyes. Even though they had been restraining themselves, Zhou Xuanji could sense the murderous intent they were suppressing in their hearts. They were muscular and wore different clothes. The aura that they gave off was like that of ancient demons. Even on this giant training island, Zhou Xuanji rarely encountered powerful cultivators with such an aura. "Greetings, my lord." They spoke simultaneously. Even though they had human bodies, their hair was disheveled and their faces were covered with wounds. When they spoke, it was as if they had enmity with Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji nodded and asked, "How did he convince you?" Sovereign Shuyu was the first to reply, "We are only seeking a future." Having heard this, Yuan Cheng felt even more proud and gratified. He had been persuading them for many years, and it was hard to explain the bitterness behind it. "Alright, my first mission for you is to clear this place. I want no other living beings within a radius of 10,000 miles, Zhou Xuanji instructed. Right after he spoke, the 5 sovereigns disappeared at the same time. Boom, 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 a battle broke out. A violent aura swept across the surroundings. Zhou Xuanji did not look at the battle but stared at Yuan Cheng and asked, "You need so much time?" Yuan Cheng replied, "It's not difficult to subdue them, but it takes energy to convince them wholeheartedly. I made them understand that working for you has a better future than working for the cardinal heaven. They are now fighting for themselves." Zhou Xuanji nodded before pointing at the sovereign heaven statue and said with a smile, "I want it. What do you think I should do?" Yuan Cheng squinted his eyes. He was trying to guess what Zhou Xuanji was implying. "I'm afraid it'll be a little difficult. I need to think about it," Yuan Cheng said as he rubbed his chin. He already understood Zhou Xuanji's intention. However, the other party was the will of a cardinal heaven expert. It was indescribably difficult to replace it without alerting the training island. Zhou Xuanji did not disturb him but waited quietly. "You guys, are you crazy?" Sovereign Crimson Cloud. "You are someone who is infinitely close to the imperishable stage. How can you listen to a great sovereign of the 6 courts? You are pissing me off. You really think I'm afraid of you? Then let's fight." Hundreds of powerful cultivators cursed one after another. The 5 sovereigns displayed their domineering power, and no one could fight them head-on. Even Zhou Xuanji was shocked by the aura they gave off when they used their divine abilities. Soon, the powerful cultivators began to flee. There were still some tough cultivators who were still fighting as though they were going to perish together with the 5 sovereigns. Zhou Xuanji flew up to the statue's eyes and looked at the sovereign heaven's face seriously for the first time. Although it was only a statue of a god, it still made him feel the arrogance of a god that looked down upon the boundless universe. Zhou Xuanji imagined what kind of aura the sovereign heaven would have. About the time it took for half an incense stick to burn. The 5 sovereigns either killed or drove away the living beings around them. They returned to Zhou Xuanji expressionlessly. Zhou Xuanji did not look at them but took out his Soul Kunlun sword. He pierced the tip of the sword into the statue's forehead and injected his sovereign's divine energy into the blade. Boom! The statue began to tremble violently and countless grains of sand slid down from it. Yuan Cheng's expression changed as he stared at the Soul Kunlun sword. This sword, he had seen many legendary weapons, but Zhou Xuanji's sword was always unfathomable to him. This sword could absorb consciousness. That's right. Zhou Xuanji wanted to forcefully absorb the sovereign heaven's consciousness. Yuan Cheng took a deep breath and waved his hands. Surging divine energy burst out from his body, and a beam of light shot out from his body and quickly turned into a gigantic ball of light that enveloped the sovereign heaven god statue and the entire land. The dense fog between the heavens and the earth was stirred and absorbed onto the surface of the ball of light. This divine ability can isolate divine sense, vision, and sound. Unless it is broken, there will be no movement at all. You can show your power now, Yuanqing said. Yuanqing spoke. As the sound of his voice faded, a violent shockwave erupted from within the Paragon Heavenly God statue, sending all of them flying out. Zhou Xuanji quickly stabilized his body. He looked over and saw a strand of black smoke flying out from the statue's eyes. Chapter 978. The black smoke that came out of the sovereign god statue's eyes quickly formed into a human figure. This figure's body was exactly the same as the statue. It was the will of a sovereign heaven. He quickly materialized and revealed his true appearance. His face was square and dignified, and his eyes were cold and sharp under his blade-like brows. His hair was coiled up under a black crown with gold, and he wore a black robe. The black robe was embroidered with a red phoenix, a golden dragon, and a silver qilin. As the robe fluttered in the wind, an immense pressure descended from the sky, which made Zhou Xuanji and the others look grave. Sovereign. Heaven? Sovereign Zhenhuan mumbled with a complicated expression. His heart began to waver. The other 4 sovereigns felt the same. Their initial goal in coming here was to worship a sovereign heaven. It was just that they had waited for too long, but a sovereign heaven had yet to appear. Sword Emperor, are you really going to oppose me? The sovereign heaven asked coldly as he looked at Zhou Xuanji disdainfully. Just when he spoke, the ground below him froze. Ice covered the surface of the ground and crawled up his body. Yuanqing was also looking at the sovereign heaven. This was also his first time seeing a sovereign heaven. The appearance of this legend in the boundless universe silenced everyone. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "It's not that I'm opposing you. You want to kill me and I'm not allowed to resist?" The sovereign heaven stared at him and said, "If you don't resist, I will let you die easily. If you resist, your fate will be worse than death." Zhou Xuanji's smile grew even wider. It turned out that legends also like to talk nonsense. He immediately activated the sword fusion technique. The legendary sword throne fused into his body, and he entered combat mode. He raised the suppressive legendary sword in his right hand and the Thousand Realms banishing sword in his left. The Thousand Realms banishing sword combined 1,000 planes and possessed horrifying power. In terms of destructive power, it was comparable to the suppressive legendary sword. With both swords in hand, he felt that the sovereign heaven was not that terrifying. His eyes glowed with violet light as he walked toward the sovereign heaven. "You are." The sovereign heaven narrowed his eyes and said coldly. Boom. Zhou Xuanji activated the Sword Emperor extinction straightaway. Violent divine energy swept across all directions. The sovereign heaven exploded immediately. The 5 Sword Emperors and Yuanqing were sent flying away, and the gigantic ball of light shattered. Yuanqing's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly used his divine ability again, condensing another ball of light to isolate this area. Following this, Zhou Xuanji created an Outer of Soul clone, which directly entered the statue. At the same time, he killed the Paragon Heaven Empress and absorbed a huge amount of divine power. As he suppressed it, he controlled his avatar to replace the statue. What an enormous amount of godly energy. There's hope for him to break through to the 7 Court Supreme stage in one go. Zhou Xuanji was pleasantly surprised in his heart, but he looked calm on the surface. Yuanqing and the 5 supreme martial artists stared at him, dumbfounded. So strong. That divine art just now, Paragon Crimson Firmament said in a trembling voice. Even they felt pressured by the will of an exalt heaven. However, Zhou Xuanji directly killed it. Now they no longer dared to underestimate Zhou Xuanji. Yuanqing said excitedly, "Did you see that? I told you that he would be the next boundless overlord. He would be comparable to a cardinal heaven expert, or even surpass them." He was extremely excited. He was afraid that Zhou Xuanji would be afraid when he encountered sovereign heaven experts. Only a supreme genius would feel that kind of fear. The 5 supreme martial artists nodded in unison. They looked at Zhou Xuanji with fanatical eyes. If Zhou Xuanji had any intention of compromising, their faith would be shaken. "Master, aren't you afraid of the revenge of a cardinal heaven expert?" Sovereign Fear asked carefully. He no longer dared to show his displeasure in front of Zhou Xuanji. He looked very humble. Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and said, "The revenge has already begun. It's not against me but against the entire northern boundless realm." Yuanqing came up to him. Holding back his excitement, he rubbed his hands and said, "Your plan is about to come true. Are you ready?" Zhou Xuanji nodded and said with a smile, "This will of a cardinal heaven expert is weaker than I thought. It seems like he did not replenish this will." This incident revealed two pieces of information. First, the Cardinal Heaven expert on every training island could be weakened. Second, the Cardinal Heaven experts were very busy and could not afford to maintain their scattered wills. Both pieces of information were beneficial to him. Yuan Qing also thought of this. He burst into laughter and said, I hope his troubles last longer. Let's quickly take control of this island and then look for other islands. Countless ferocious demons were hiding on every training island. Other than the scouts, all of them were looking forward to the Cardinal Heaven experts fervently. If the Sovereign Heaven ordered them to deal with a target, they would surely follow suit. Zhou Xuanji nodded slightly before focusing on suppressing the divine energy of a Cardinal Heaven expert. Star's domain. Xiao Jinghong and Zhao Tsongjian were drinking wine in a stone pavilion in the starry sky. This place was very close to the Million Star Guards, and they could see the majestic Star's palace at a glance. Jinghong, when are we going out to explore? Zhao Tsongjian asked with a smile. Xiao Jinghong swirled his wine cup and replied with a smile, What's the hurry? Let's wait for revered teacher's arrangement. Zhao Tsongjian sat up straight and said seriously, We must prove ourselves. Master has always been protecting us. Even though we became great sovereign, he only let us do things that are not life-threatening under his protection. Xiao Jinghong frowned and asked, What's your plan? He wanted to make a name for himself in the northern boundless realm and help Zhou Xuanji. Although it was safe to stay in the star's domain, it was not what they wanted. Let's expand Emperor's Sword Court and conquer the court realm. We can't touch the domain, but it shouldn't be difficult for us to touch the court realm, Zhao Tsongjian said excitedly with a smile. Xiao Jinghong hesitated and did not know if he should make a decision. At this moment, Jin Qing flew above the stone pavilion and arrived before the star's palace. He sent a telepathic message into the palace to look for Zhou Xuanji. Soon the gate opened. Zhou Xuanji's extra soul clone was sitting on the throne, handling some of the decisions of the star's palace on his behalf. My lord, the enemy has appeared. There are nearly 1,000 great sovereigns. They did not charge into the star's domain but sat in a formation. They come with ill intentions. Jin Qing knelt before Zhou Xuanji and reported in a deep voice. He looked anxious as though he had encountered an extremely urgent danger. Ever since they defeated the Cardinal Heaven army, Jin Qing was very excited. But after he calmed down, he fell into endless fear. The Cardinal Heaven had never suffered such a crushing defeat. It could even be said to be a humiliation. The pride of the Cardinal Heaven would surely take revenge in more brutal ways. So, when he saw the great sovereigns, he felt that the Cardinal Heaven was making a comeback. The more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. Zhou Xuanji shook his head in a smile and said, Jin Qing, what are you afraid of? We will face countless enemies in the future. How can you be so flustered? Having heard this, Jin Qing took a deep breath and tried his best to calm down. Don't worry. My original body will be back soon. He has already mastered an even greater power. At that time, you will be greatly surprised, Zhou Xuanji said with a mysterious smile. Chapter 979. Stronger Power? Jin Qing was stunned. His heartbeat quickened as his imagination started to run wild. Zhou Xuanji rarely boasted and always did what he said, so he did not doubt him. Go down first. You're the great commander of the star's domain. Don't panic all the time. Otherwise, how will the people below look at you? Zhou Xuanji said earnestly. After that, he waved his hand. Today I could only bow and leave. Zhou Xuanji's avatar closed his eyes again and continued to empty his mind. On the training island. Boom, 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 Zhou Xuanji meditated in midair, and his aura continuously exploded, shaking the clouds. He was trying to break through to become a paragon of the 7 courts. The 5 supreme martial artists were scattered at the foot of the statue, cultivating on their own. Yuan Qing, on the other hand, was observing the divine statue with an excited expression. No one knew what he was plotting. Zhou Xuanji was at the final juncture of his breakthrough. He forcefully broke through in one go, and his cultivation underwent a qualitative and quantitative change. The supreme divine energy in his body began to grow exponentially. He heaved a long sigh, his body and mind joyful. He had become stronger again. With his foundation, every time he broke through a realm, his strength would increase tremendously. When he looked at the 5 sword sovereigns again, he suddenly felt that the 5 of them were actually quite ordinary. He shook his head, smiled, and looked at the statue. We should leave, Zhou Xuanji said calmly. His outer-of-soul doppelganger had already told him that the star domain might be in trouble. He had to hurry back. Yuan Qing came back to his senses and quickly replied, "All right." He was taken aback and asked, "What about this island?" "Don't worry, I can already control this island," Zhou Xuanji said as he smiled. He integrated an extra soul doppelganger into the statue. Only after entering it did he realize how powerful a Cardinal Heaven expert was. This divine statue could control the entire training island, and all the restrictions on the island were controlled by the divine statue. In addition, its defensive power was extremely high, and Grand Sovereigns were almost unable to break it. Of course, how many people on this island would dare to disrespect the statue? After resting for the time it took half an incense stick to burn, Zhou Xuanji and the others jumped off the training island. He enveloped Yuan Qing, the Sword Emperor, and the others with his supreme god force before entering the spiritless state. Traveling through the spacetime kaleidoscope, Yuan Qing and the 5 supreme martial artists were dumbfounded. This is a spacetime turbulence? That's not right, it's so fast. My spiritual will was destroyed the moment it came into contact with it. Oh my god. What kind of divine ability is this? Master actually knows such a divine ability, isn't this a little too? The 6 of them were shocked by the soulless state, especially Yuan Qing, who was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Before, he was already in awe of godly spirit's speed and thought that Zhou Xuanji had hope of cultivating the legendary godly spirit state. However, he did not expect that Zhou Xuanji had already mastered it. Moreover, this was the first time he had experienced such a profound state of mind. They admired Zhou Xuanji even more. The Northern Limitless Realm will be the first chessboard for me to dominate the boundless universe. You guys have to help me play it well. Are you confident? Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile. Yes. The 6 of them answered in unison without hesitation. Zhou Xuanji continued, "Next I will bring you to my domain. You will soon have a mission which is to conquer other domains. I want to quickly build up my power." The 6 of them were stunned once more. Domain? Yuan Qing asked in a trembling voice, "You already have a domain?" He had already tried his best to think highly of Zhou Xuanji, but he still underestimated him. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said softly, "Here we are." Having said this, he took Yuan Qing and the other 5 out of the godly spirit state and descended into the Stars Hall. Yuan Qing and the 5 sovereigns subconsciously looked around. Their eyes first fell on Zhou Xuanji's Outer of Soul clone on the throne. Immediately they spread out their divine will and scanned the star's domain. The Outer of Soul clone entered Zhou Xuanji's body as he took a seat. Then, he transmitted his voice to the court lords and commanders of the star's domain. Soon, Yuan Qing flew into the Stars Hall with the great sovereigns one after another. Even Xin Yanqing had come. Her gaze fell on Yuan Qing, her eyebrows furrowing. Yuan Qing also saw her. His expression drastically changed. Why is she here? Yuan Qing's heart trembled. He subconsciously lowered his head, not daring to look at Xin Yanqing. The other great sovereigns turned their eyes to the Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns. All of them were secretly shocked. So strong. Both sides began to size each other up. The Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns were also shocked. They had heard of the Stars domain before. Before they entered the training island, the Stars domain didn't belong to Zhou Xuanji. There were so many great sovereigns in the Stars domain. Let me introduce them. They are my newly recruited subordinates. This is Yuan Qing. His cultivation realm once surpassed the great sovereigns of the court realm. The other 5 are the great sovereigns of the 9 courts. They are. Zhou Xuanji began to introduce them one by one. The cultivation of Yuan Qing and the Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns shocked everyone in the Stars domain. Where did the Sword Emperor find so many terrifying experts? Any one of them could become the strongest expert in a domain. Zhou Xuanji began to arrange positions for Yuan Qing and the others. Yuan Qing served as his protector. The 5 sovereigns were named the Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns. All of them were directly under his control. Their status was on the same level as Yuan Qing. Yuan Qing didn't have any objections. He was convinced. After all, the other party's cultivation was so high. Moreover, Yuan Qing and the others didn't really seize power. They just had the same status as him. Supreme Crimson Heaven, from now on, you will be the leader of the 5 sovereigns. Your first task is to inspect the surroundings of the Stars domain and eradicate the threats, Zhou Xuanji ordered. Upon hearing this, the Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns immediately bowed and disappeared into thin air. Afterward, Zhou Xuanji let everyone rest. Soon there were only 3 people left in the hall. In addition to Zhou Xuanji, there were also Xin Yanqing and Yuan Qing. The atmosphere between the two was very strange. Xin Yanqing kept staring at Yuan Qing. Yuan Qing didn't dare to look at her, let alone leave directly. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and asked, "Do you know each other?" He had noticed that something was wrong just now. Yuan Qing was obviously afraid of Shen Yinxing. "We know each other and our relationship isn't shallow," Shen Yinxing said meaningfully as she walked up to Yuan Qing. Thump. Yuan Qing directly knelt in front of her and cried, "It wasn't me. It really wasn't me. The person who plotted against you was the Eastern Infinity Royal Clan." "Plotted against me?" Zhou Xuanji's expression suddenly became strange. Seeing Yuan Qing on the verge of collapse, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of grudge the two had. Shen Yinxing looked down at him and said, "I know the Eastern Infinity Royal Clan. They will pay the price. I don't care what your purpose is. If you dare to hurt Zhou Xuanji, you should understand my means." Hearing this, Yuan Qing raised his head in surprise. He held back his excitement and said, "I really want to support him. If you and I join hands, we will definitely make him stand in the Northern Infinity." "Do you deserve it?" Shen Yinxing said disdainfully. Yuan Qing said, "Of course I deserve it. Back then I helped them find—" Before he could finish his words, he immediately shut up. Shen Yinxing showed a dangerous smile. Her eyes even flashed with killing intent. Yuan Qing said in a panic, "If I dare to have the slightest malice against the Sword Emperor in the future, I, Yuan Qing, will have to be destroyed. If I can't be destroyed, I will die directly." Chapter 980. "Get lost first, I want to talk to Zhou Xuanji alone," Shen Yinxing said impatiently. Shen Yinxing said impatiently. She nodded and bowed before leaving. Afterward, she walked up to Zhou Xuanji and said in amazement, "You are really amazing. You went out for a trip and your cultivation reached the 7 courts great sovereign. You even subdued 6 top-tier great sovereigns." She was really surprised. She thought that Zhou Xuanji was just going to cultivate. She didn't expect him to subdue 6 experts. "Can you tell me what happened to you before?" Zhou Xuanji asked, raising his brow. He had always been curious about Shen Yinxing's past and identity. If she didn't say it, then he would ask Yuan Qing. Shen Yinxing shrugged and said, "What is there to say? I was too arrogant back then and provoked countless enemies. All forces wanted to deal with me. They looked for that reptile to find my trace. In the end they succeeded. I killed myself and reincarnated into the anti-Kunlun of the Kunlun Origin Court. I wanted to go to the Kunlun Origin Court but your sovereign expelled me. What's that guy's name again? Wuxia, right? I still have to settle this account with him in the future." Zhou Xuanji stared at her and said, "Then tell me, how arrogant were you in the past?" Shen Yinxing shrugged and said with a smile, "You don't want to know." Zhou Xuanji looked straight at her without saying a word. His attitude was already very obvious. He wanted to know. "Since you want to know, bear the consequences yourself," Shen Yinxing said, shaking her head. Shen Yinxing shook her head, and then her expression turned serious. "I am the previous Hongmeng Heaven. Our Hongmeng Heaven's fate is passed down to only one person. If I don't fall, the next Hongmeng Heaven will not be born." Zhou Xuanji's eyes widened. He couldn't believe his ears. She is Hongmeng Heaven? Hongmeng Heaven is very strong. But on the road to becoming stronger, we will lose our mind and become more and more arrogant. The most terrifying thing is that once we are defeated, our memories of Hongmeng Heaven will gradually fade. I'm not trying to hide anything, but I have forgotten many things. Speaking of this, Shen Yinxing's face turned gloomy. Zhou Xuanji frowned. He didn't expect that there would be such a price for becoming Hongmeng Heaven. He suddenly thought that he had become more and more conceited recently. Could it be because of his identity as Hongmeng Heaven? "No, if you are Hongmeng Heaven, then mortal god?" Zhou Xuanji asked hesitantly. Shen Yinxing smiled and said, "Yes, I created the mortal god, so I am also called the mortal ancestor god. It was because of the Hongqian bloodline's legacy that I was able to be reborn." She looked at Zhou Xuanji seriously and said, "Your temperament will continue to grow. You don't have to restrain yourself because you can't. However, I hope that you can maintain your original heart. Back then I was too arrogant." With that, she turned around and prepared to leave. She had already revealed what she needed to, and the rest was for Zhou Xuanji to figure out by himself. After she left, Zhou Xuanji was still thinking about Hongmeng Heaven. It was dusk and a sea of clouds covered the sky. On a floating island, a blue-clothed man was playing the zither under a tree. It was him who had sent Wu Yin to assist Zhou Xuanji. He suddenly stopped and smiled. "Since you're already here, why don't you come out?" After a while, leaves fell to the ground and a figure appeared beside the blue-robed man. This person was wearing a white robe and half a black mask on his face. His silver hair was flowing behind his head. The half of his face that was exposed was very handsome. His pupils were blue like two gems, crystal clear and faintly flickering with green light. Bainzi, why are you looking for me? The blue-robed man asked with a smile. He sized up Bainzi as a strange look flashed across his eyes. Bainzi looked at him and replied indifferently, when will the royal family come out? How long do you want to hide? After the destruction of Hongmeng Heaven you have been hiding. Are you afraid of the revenge of the next Hongmeng Heaven? The blue-robed man smiled calmly and said, when the time is right we will naturally come out. Your close friend, the evil emperor, is facing a crisis. Aren't you going to help him? Bainzi stared at him and stopped talking. The two began to look at each other. The atmosphere became tense. Even the wind stopped blowing. Zhongji, the endless universe is really boring without you. Since you still want to hide, don't blame me for being impolite. Bainzi turned around and sneered at the blue-robed man. I know you have been paying attention to someone recently. I will catch him. I want to see why you are so fascinated by him. Having heard this, the blue-robed man who was Zhongji stood up. A horrifying murderous aura burst out and locked onto Bainzi. Seems like you have many spies in our royal family. Since you want me to fight, why don't we fight first? Zhongji said with a smile. His tone was still relaxed but his eyes were extremely cold. Bainzi smiled and said, just what I wanted. Inside the Star Palace, Zhou Xuanji sat lazily and asked casually, are you really just passing by? Sovereign Crimson Cloud nodded and said, there are a total of 927 sovereigns. We have already captured them. They are willing to surrender. Should we kill them or let them go? The other 4 sovereigns stood by the side like wooden pillars, motionless. Zhou Xuanji tapped the armrest with his fingers and fell into deep thought. Throw them into the training island. Go, Zhou Xuanji instructed. These great sovereigns were not very powerful. Once they were thrown into the training island, it would be difficult for them to escape. He did not believe that they were just passing by. Since they were just passing by, why did they stay for so long? And they even put up a formation. They were obviously up to no good. Throw them into the training island for further training. Yes. The 5 sovereigns replied and disappeared from the palace. Zhou Xuanji took out another 2 faded beads and continued to study them. After breaking through to the 7 courts great sovereign, he was not in a hurry to cultivate. He wanted to settle down for a while and let his body adapt to his new sovereign divine power. At this moment, the 2 faded beads suddenly glowed and forcefully drilled into his glabella. What's going on? Zhou Xuanji was stunned. The faded beads rarely went out of control like this, as though they were hiding from something. A murderous aura suddenly filled the Star Palace, which shocked Zhou Xuanji. Enemies. Sword Emperor, you are really something. You dare to take my master's island. Today I will absorb your soul and leave your body as a warning to this domain. A mocking laughter came. Before the voice even finished, a black sword appeared in front of Zhou Xuanji out of thin air and pierced toward his glabella. Clang. An intimidating divine sword appeared in front of him in an instant and blocked the black sword. He immediately got up and used the sword fusion technique. The Thousand Realms chaotic hegemon execution sword appeared in his hand. A lackey of sovereign heaven? Since you are here, why don't you show yourself? Let me see what the reptile that is about to die under my sword looks like. Zhou Xuanji said coldly, not panicking at all. If this wasn't the Star Domain, he might have used the Sword Emperor extinction to kill the other party. Boom. The black sword exploded with horrifying power, intending to destroy the Star Palace. Zhou Xuanji immediately stabilized the Star Palace with his divine power. You don't dare to use that divine ability? The mocking laughter came again, provoking Zhou Xuanji. I have countless legendary swords. Chapter 981. Facing the enemy's provocation, Zhou Xuanji did not lose his mind. His god power had already enveloped the entire Stars Hall. He directly pulled the entire Stars Hall into a state of godly absence and disappeared from the Stars Domain. The enemy cried out in alarm. He could clearly feel the changes outside the hall. Zhou Xuanji laughed coldly. This guy was indeed hiding in the palace. He brought the Hall of Stars out of the soulless state and arrived in an empty universe. He gripped his sword with both hands and executed the Absolute Sword Emperor. Boom. Sword chi swept across and smashed the Hall of Stars into pieces. A blood-curdling scream followed. The void appeared in Zhou Xuanji's eyes, and his gaze locked onto a shadow. Was a soul. This person's face was deathly pale, and his figure was slightly thin. His long green hair was twisted together like many small snakes, and he wore a dark brocade robe. He was gnashing his teeth as he stared at Zhou Xuanji. Hatred filled his eyes. A subordinate of a Cardinal Heaven expert? Why didn't the Cardinal Heaven experts come personally? Why did they have to send them to their deaths? Zhou Xuanji asked in confusion. Even though this person was very powerful, he could not withstand his Sword Emperor extinction. Of course, perhaps it was because his absolute Sword Emperor was too powerful. He was stronger than everyone had expected, including a Cardinal Heaven expert. The green-haired man suddenly laughed sinisterly. What's the name of your divine art? Absolute Sword Emperor. Impressive indeed. However, it is still not enough to kill me. The green-haired man quickly materialized his body. With the black sword in hand, he walked toward Zhou Xuanji step by step. Zhou Xuanji also walked toward him. Since the other party was so arrogant, he would just kill him. Boom. The two of them collided, and the sound of swords ringing reverberated endlessly. The speed at which they swung their swords was very fast, especially the green-haired man. Even when facing two swords, he was still skillful and at ease. However, Zhou Xuanji could sense that he had some reservations. This fellow might look arrogant on the surface, but he was actually frightened by the Absolute Sword Emperor. Boom. Zhou Xuanji used the Sword Emperor extinction technique again, blasting the green-haired man's body and absorbing his divine energy at the same time. The green-haired man quickly reformed his physical body, but this time, his aura was significantly weaker. With a gloomy face, he quickly swung his sword, and the violent sword chi wreaked havoc in all directions. Streaks of afterimages flowed out of his body and turned into independent forms. He charged toward Zhou Xuanji with his sword. These afterimages used different divine abilities of the way of the sword. Sword chi was like a flood, inundating Zhou Xuanji from all directions. Zhou Xuanji laughed disdainfully. He had played such tricks before. He used godly supreme speed to prevent the green-haired man from tracking him. When he appeared again, he was behind the green-haired man. He swapped the Thousand Realms Chaotic Execution Sword for the Soul Kunlun Sword and used the Absolute Sword again. The green-haired man's body exploded again. Zhou Xuanji took the opportunity to swing the Soul Kunlun Sword, and a horrifying suction force burst out. This kind of suction only targeted the soul. After suffering the Absolute Sword 3 times in a row, no matter how strong the green-haired man's soul was, he would still be severely injured. When his soul appeared, it was already in front of the Kunlun sword. The green-haired man was completely flustered. He wanted to beg for mercy, but he didn't know what to say. He took a deep breath and said in a trembling voice, "It's best if you don't kill me. If I die, the Cardinal Heaven expert will understand my strength and come personally." Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes and asked, "You still haven't answered my question. Why hasn't the Cardinal Heaven come? Isn't the evil emperor waiting for him to reach the peak?" Even if it was secluded cultivation, there had to be a limit. He had negotiated with the Cardinal Heaven's will before. He was prepared to face the Cardinal Heaven expert. Now that the Cardinal Heaven expert had not returned to the peak, it was the best time to deal with the Cardinal Heaven expert. His wings had already grown, and he didn't just rely on himself. "I'm not sure. He seems to be looking for the sovereign serendipity. His original body isn't in the Northern Boundless Realm, but he will be back soon. He is preparing for the Northern Boundless Realm conference and inviting all the lords," the green-haired man replied with gritted teeth. He could already sense Zhou Xuanji's murderous intent and had to reveal the truth. Zhou Xuanji asked in confusion, "Isn't he going to slaughter the entire Northern Boundless Realm? Why is he holding a conference?" As for the sovereign serendipity, he did not care about it. How could the 3 sovereign serendipity be found so easily? The overlords of the Boundless Realm were constantly changing, but the sovereign serendipity remained. Zhou Xuanji had always felt that the supreme legendary sword system was the sovereign serendipity, so he did not have much desire for the sovereign serendipity. He wants to use this to rank the Northern Boundless Realm. His reputation will attract most of the powerful cultivators in the Northern Boundless Realm, and he will eliminate half of the lords in the conference, the green-haired man replied. At this point he began to tremble. He had said what he should say and what he should not say. Even if Zhou Xuanji let him go, he had to think of a way to escape the pursuit of a Cardinal Heaven cultivator. Zhou Xuanji hesitated for a moment and chose to let him go. No matter what, he did not slaughter the Starry Realm. After the Kunlun Soul Sword disappeared, the green-haired man backed off immediately. Zhou Xuanji, we will surely meet again in the future, he said with gritted teeth. Zhou Xuanji entered spiritless mode and quickly returned to the starry realm. He created a star palace in the air before entering it to rest. Today's battle made him aware of the Cardinal Heaven's plan. He did not need to act for now and only needed to wait quietly. The Cardinal Heaven wanted to change the situation in the northern boundless realm, and he could use this opportunity to soar. Before that, he had to unite all of the courts under his command into a united front. Spring passed and autumn came. The Starry Realm and the Kunlun Origin Court were at peace again. Everyone was cultivating hard, and Zhou Xuanji was celebrating his 7,500th birthday. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 7,500 years old. Gotcha started. Ding. Congratulations, the sword owner obtained the Karma Sovereign Serendipity Sword. Zhou Xuanji, who was about to leave, was stunned. Karma Cauldron revered divine sword. He had been waiting for a godly sword of this level. Ordinary or iron, bronze, silver, gold, amethyst, glorious gold, heavenly soul, intimidating spirit, celestial shaking, god-slaying, apocalypse, ancient gazing, disaster releasing, universe essence, overturning heaven, heavenly piercing, nine extremities chaos. Profound way, honored lord, vast sky, merging all life, court overturning. The myriad flower origin court, the lord of karma cauldron, the great calamity. To use the myriad flower origin court divine sword, one had to be at least at the grand sovereign realm. As for the karma cauldron, only those who had surpassed the grand sovereign realm could use it. Information about the fortuitous slayer sword appeared before his eyes. Sword name, sword of fate grade, venerable karma cauldron, description. This sword can cut off all opportunities and karma, causing the enemy to sink into endless mediocrity, and even suffer from the backlash of misfortune. To use this sword, one must attain the undying realm. Imperishable realm? Zhou Xuanji smiled bitterly. It was just as he had guessed. Although he had already reached the level of a supreme of the seven courts, he was still far from the imperishable realm. He shook his head, got up, and returned to the Kunlun Origin Court. In the Emperor's Sword Divine Range, Jianghu, Xian Xianghua, Zhou Tanhua, Zhou Shaoxian, Daoya Old Man, and so on. His relatives were waiting for him to celebrate his birthday. Since everything had settled down, Zhou Shaoxian proposed to celebrate Zhou Xuanji's birthday every 500 years and let everyone get together. After all, they were scattered in different worlds and even in the endless universe. It was very difficult to meet each other often. Chapter 982. Above the sea of clouds on the cliff. Father, you are finally here. Zhou Shaoxian came to Zhou Xuanji's side and held his arm with a giggle. The others came over to congratulate Zhou Xuanji on his birthday. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "Find a seat. Today we will only talk about the past and the future, not business." Everyone laughed and nodded. By now, the group of people who had followed Zhou Xuanji from the very beginning had all achieved meteoric success. Some disciples had become lords of origin cities, some had become famous swordsmen in the Kunlun Origin Court, some had become lords of court realms, and some had already roamed the myriad star domain or even the northern boundless continent. Zhou Xuanji's birthday banquet was also a day of joy for them. Every time this happened, they would remember their past and never forget it. After the banquet began, everyone began to talk about their recent interesting experiences. Most of the time, Zhou Xuanji listened quietly. He enjoyed such an atmosphere, it was so boring to keep cultivating. Jianghu sat beside him and asked softly, "You seem to be in a good mood. Did you get another powerful legendary sword?" Zhou Xuanji glanced at her and smiled without saying anything. Now he didn't have to hide some things. The supreme legendary sword system might attract countless disasters in the mortal world, but it was nothing in the boundless universe. Now the legendary sword was not Zhou Xuanji's biggest reliance, at least on the surface. The enemy did not know about the sword fusion technique and thought that he relied on other divine abilities. Your disciples have established a branch of Emperor Sword Court outside, attracting many juniors to join. What do you think? Should we let some disciples out? Jianghu asked softly. Zhou Xuanji was not in the Kunlun Origin Court, and the Emperor Sword Divine Range often looked for her. She did not want to disturb Zhou Xuanji, so she found this opportunity to ask. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "Sure, in the Kunlun Origin Court, as long as you call me I can hear you. Why wait until now?" He already knew about this, but since Jianghu did not say anything, he did not bother to mention it. It was good for the disciples to settle down. When one desired something very much, it was the easiest to test one's temperament. After waiting for hundreds of years, it was time to let them go out and explore. When the time comes, pick 10,000 people first. Don't take impatient people or those with weak cultivation, Zhou Xuanji said. In the boundless universe, even the stars' domain was not absolutely safe. They were impatient and easily stirred up trouble. Zhou Xuanji could not always keep an eye on them. Even if he was a disciple of Emperor Sword Court and was killed for provoking enemies, what could he say? Now that the multitude stars' territory was under his control, the living creatures wandering nearby might belong to the multitude stars' territory. He could not be too biased towards one side. He could allocate resources privately, but he had to be fair to outsiders. Okay, I'll remember that. Jianghu nodded with a smile. The banquet continued and everyone was in high spirits. After the birthday banquet, Zhou Xuanji returned to the Star's Palace. Yuan Qing had been waiting at the gate for a long time. Zhou Xuanji let him in. Things aren't looking good. The Cardinal Heaven has invited dozens of lords from Northern Limitless to participate in the conference, and you're one of them. If you don't go, it means that you're afraid and Northern Limitless will definitely look down on you. But if you go, you'll definitely die. Yuan Qing said anxiously with an ugly expression on his face. It was obvious that the Cardinal Heavens had ill intentions. However, anyone with ambition who rejected them would be eliminated prematurely. Zhou Xuanji replied calmly, I already knew. Do you have any specific requirements? He had been waiting for this day for a long time. No requirements, just the location. But if I bring too many subordinates, I will be at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. If I bring all the elites, the Cardinal Heaven might slaughter them, Yuan Qing guessed. Yuan Qing guessed. Every choice had a hidden consequence. It wasn't that the Cardinal Heaven was very smart, but that he was too powerful and had too much power. For Zhou Xuanji it was a complete blow. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, I will bring you and the 5 sovereigns. Yuan Qing's eyes widened as he asked, then Shen Yinxing, stay in the multitude stars territory, Zhou Xuanji replied. He didn't have complete trust in the Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns, so he naturally had to bring them with him. Yuan Qing took a deep breath and said, okay, do you have a plan to retreat? Zhou Xuanji didn't answer and asked back, will the evil emperor go too? Of course. Okay, you arrange it. When to go? Wait for another 10 years. We can't go too early. We must wait for most people to arrive before we arrive. That's the safest way. Okay. After Zhou Xuanji made up his mind, Yuan Qing left in a hurry. He needed to make some preparations to deal with various situations. After he left, Zhou Xuanji called Wu Yan over. This guy had been busy winning people's hearts in the dragon follower territory, and the results were pretty good. Daozong XN still didn't know that his forces were collapsing. He was busy cultivating, wanting to catch up to Zhou Xuanji as soon as possible. No matter how big the dragon follower territory was, what really determined the status of a force was the strength of the highest combat power. Wu Yan asked, Master, what's the matter? His eyes were still so clear, unaffected by the power. The Cardinal Heaven invited me to participate in the Northern Infinity Festival. Come with me, Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. With the Eastern Infinity royal family there, the Cardinal Heaven and the evil emperor would have to hesitate if they wanted to touch him. Wu Yan nodded and said, I will listen to your orders at any time. Tell me about your situation in the dragon follower territory, Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. This kid knew everything but he pretended to be ignorant. Wu Yan didn't hide anything and began to tell him about his recent situation. He had secretly controlled dozens of courts. On the surface, the court lords were still in power, but he had secretly grasped the lifelines of these court lords and made them work for him. Daozong Xan had been in seclusion for over 1,000 years, and had never shown himself. Coincidentally, Daozong Xan's trusted followers noticed that something was wrong, and speechless needed to disappear for some time. Yes, let's wait in the astral domain. Zhou Xuanji nodded and left without a word. Seeing his unchanging face, Zhou Xuanji suspected that he was a puppet. 10 years passed as quickly as it came. Zhou Xuanji set off with Yuan Qing leading the way. The Sword Emperors, the 5 sovereigns and Wordless followed behind him. The 5 supreme beings couldn't remain calm. After all, they were about to face the unending overlord of the North and the legendary legend. What awaited them might very well be death. Yuan Qing was talking to Wu Yan. He had guessed Wu Yan's identity the moment he saw her, so he was very excited. Little brother, do you think the evil emperor or a Cardinal Heaven expert is more of a threat? Yuan Qing asked with a smile. The pressure on him was gone. With the Eastern Endless royal family present, they could be considered to have a powerful backer. Unlike the northern unending realm, the eastern unending realm was absolutely unified. The imperial clan would exist forever and it would be everlasting. Speechless answered, "It's all the same." Even if his attitude was indifferent, Yuan Cheng was still enthusiastic. The Sword Emperors and the 5 sovereigns were very curious. What was this kid's identity? Yuan Cheng's status was only below Zhou Xuanji's. Even the great sovereigns of the astral domain had to bow to him. Chapter 983. The northern boundless region was vast. It would take a long time to travel from the All-Stars domain to the venue of the meeting. Along the way, Zhou Xuanji rested on the legendary sword throne while Yuan Qing dragged the group forward with his divine energy. Wu Yin did not like to talk. The 5 sovereigns were also silent and cultivated on their own. Yuan Qing was the most anxious. As he led the group, he had to be careful of possible dangers ahead. Although the Cardinal Heaven invited Zhou Xuanji openly, who could guarantee that there would be no ambushes along the way? They traveled for about 5 years. This day, they encountered a giant ship that was 1,000 miles long. There were many buildings on the ship, and it was already an island on the ship. It was dazzling and majestic, and there were many golden-armored divine soldiers floating above the giant ship, patrolling for it. "Who is that?" Zhou Xuanji asked softly. He could sense waves of powerful auras. There were more than 100 who were not inferior to the 5 sovereigns of the Sword Emperor. They were definitely an overlord in the northern boundless region. Yuan Cheng said with squinted eyes, "Before the Cardinal Heaven appeared, the most powerful overlord after the evil emperor was Tang Xuanwu. The Tang clan came from the Kunlun origin court. After the primeval sovereign era, every Kunlun origin court lord who came to the boundless universe would receive their help. Through them they developed an endless network of connections. Even if the evil emperor wanted to get rid of them, he would have to think twice." Tang Xuanwu? Zhou Xuanji had heard of this name before. In the northern boundless region, other than the evil emperor, he was the second most powerful faction to rebel against the Cardinal Heaven. It was said that Tang Xuanwu was the second most powerful cultivator in the northern boundless region, just below the evil emperor. After the Cardinal Heaven resurrected, he was ambushed by Tang Xuanwu and was almost defeated. That battle infuriated the Cardinal Heaven, and the 2 factions had reached a point of no return. "You must be the Sword Emperor Zhou Xuanji? You are bringing so few people to the Cardinal Heaven meeting? Aren't you seeking death?" A sonorous voice came from the ship with a mocking tone. Zhou Xuanji replied, "Doesn't bringing too many people mean that you are afraid?" Having heard that, a loud laughter came from the ship. The golden-armored divine soldiers turned to look at Zhou Xuanji with displeasure. They had heard of Zhou Xuanji's name. But to them, Zhou Xuanji was just a rising star. They had to show respect to their master. "Interesting. You're right. Let's see who's afraid when the time comes." Tang Xuanwu's laughter rang out once again. As soon as he finished speaking, the giant ship suddenly sped up and disappeared into the end of the universe in the blink of an eye. Supreme Zhenhuan curled his lips and said, "You really know how to act." The other 4 supreme beings were also very displeased. They didn't like Tang Xuanwu's tone and were very unhappy. Zhou Xuanji chuckled and said, "It's okay. Let's see who will have the last laugh." Tang Xuanwu didn't show up even though he was talking to him. It was obvious that he looked down on him. Zhou Xuanji did not hate him for this, but he did not have a good impression of him either. His situation is worse than ours. He isn't as strong as the demonic emperor, and he has a grudge against Cardinal Heaven. He's the best target for Cardinal Heaven to establish their might. Yuan Qing shook his head, his tone full of mockery. Speechless nodded and said, "I can already see his death." Zhou Xuanji smiled but did not reply. He thought so too. Cardinal Heaven experts would lose face if they didn't kill some people. Perhaps Tang Xuanwu had also thought of this, which was why he had mobilized so many people. They continued on their way. The venue of the meeting was a massive planet called the Supreme Planet. It was said to be created by Cardinal Heaven temporarily. Its gravity was extremely exaggerated, and only great sovereigns could withstand it. Yuan Qing calculated the time and only accelerated when he felt that it was about time. The Supreme Planet was located in an empty universe. Apart from meteorites, there were no other stars or court realms nearby. Looking from a distance, the Supreme Planet looked like a massive fireball. The flames only existed in the sky above the Supreme Planet. The land was beautiful, with verdant hills and limpid waters. Above the sea of fire, countless living beings were waiting. Tang Xuanwu's massive golden ship appeared out of nowhere and descended toward the supreme planet. The sea of flames above the clouds parted to make way for them. Soon after Tang Xuanwu arrived, Zhou Xuanji and the others also arrived at the supreme planet. Zhou Xuanji sat on the throne of the legendary sword and observed the supreme planet while keeping an eye on his surroundings. Yuan Qing sighed in amazement. This planet contains countless treasures. The sovereign spent a lot of money on it. There must be a great restriction on it. Toward the end he couldn't help but feel nervous. The 5 sovereigns took out their enchanted artifacts and were ready to fight at any time. Wordless was also looking around, but he looked more curious than anything else. Soon they passed through the sea of flames and flew toward the land. Zhou Xuanji looked down and saw more than 100 gigantic stone statues. They were all different from each other and reached into the clouds. He saw the sovereign heaven stone statues and his own stone statues. These stone statues should be the overlords of the northern boundless continent. They were of different heights. His stone statue belonged to the shorter category. The tallest was sovereign heaven, followed by the evil emperors. At first glance, the sovereign heaven and evil emperor's stone statues looked similar. But if one looked closely, one would realize that the sovereign heaven stone statue was slightly taller than the evil emperor's. How scheming. Zhou Xuanji had no objections. He landed on the head of his own stone statue with Yuan Qing and the others. He saw that most of the stone statues had people standing on their heads. The overlord's subordinates were scattered around the stone statues and hovered in the air. Some of them were already sweating because the pressure here was too great. Once they entered the supreme planet, they felt as though they were carrying a large world on their backs. It was extremely heavy. Yuan Qing glanced at the majestic stone statues that emerged from the sea of clouds and said softly, "They are all important figures." Zhou Xuanji saw Daozang Xian's silhouette. That guy's stone statue was shorter than him, and he had a few dozen great sovereigns with him. Daozang Xian was also looking at Zhou Xuanji. Their eyes met, and he immediately gave a flattering smile. Before he came, he met Zhou Xuanji and wanted to work together. But Zhou Xuanji used the excuse that he was in closed-door cultivation to ask Jin Cheng to dissuade him. Zhou Xuanji nodded slightly at him before sitting on the legendary sword throne and staring blankly. Some overlords took out their enchanted treasures as chairs, some stood motionless, and some meditated on the ground. The atmosphere was quite strange. Zhou Xuanji finally saw Tang Xuanwu. He stepped out of the giant golden ship. He was wearing a golden dragon robe and a jade pearl crown, which was very similar to the Jade Emperor in Zhou Xuanji's imagination. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, giving off a feeling of being high-spirited and showing off his abilities. After he landed on the head of the stone statue, a golden chair appeared out of thin air behind him. 2 golden dragons coiled around the back of the chair. He leaned back on the dragon chair and looked down at all the overlords present. At a glance, there were less than 10 owners of the stone statues who were not here. Boom! At this moment the sky changed. Thunderclouds rolled, lightning flashed, and thunder roared. A demonic wind blew. A black whirlwind landed on the evil emperor's stone statue, and the sky darkened. So coquettish. Tang Xuanwu curled his lip and said disdainfully. Before the sovereign heaven appeared, he and the evil emperor were already at odds. Chapter 984. The black whirlwind dissipated, revealing the domineering figure of the demonic emperor. He wore a black robe with many scales on it. On his left shoulder was a helmet with 2 sharp fangs attached to it. It looked extremely ferocious. He had long dark purple hair, an evil face and snake-like eyes. His clothes were very long, spreading along the top of the stone statue's head. He swept his gaze across the surroundings and laughed softly. "Looks like my North Limitless is filled with heroes. Those who should come have all come. There aren't many cowards here." He spoke very softly, but everyone here had a high cultivation base so they could all hear him. Immediately, many heroes puffed out their chests and raised their heads, revealing proud smiles. Zhou Xuanji sized up the evil emperor and was shocked in his heart. The demonic emperor was definitely the strongest existence he had ever seen. Even though he didn't release any aura, it still made him feel powerless, as if he was a mortal facing a deity. The evil emperor didn't sit down. He just stood there, causing the entire supreme planet to fall silent. When the heroes who rushed over saw this scene, they kept quiet out of fear and lowered their heads to return to the top of their stone statues. After all the heroes had arrived, only a Cardinal Heaven expert had yet to appear. No one was surprised by this. If a Cardinal Heaven expert had appeared earlier, it would have damaged his reputation. Everyone waited patiently. There was a loud bang. A blazing beam of light descended from the sky and landed on the head of the Cardinal Heaven expert. Everyone looked up. Curiosity, apprehension, nervousness, excitement, fear, and various other emotions intertwined in their hearts. Cardinal Heaven experts had threatened to slaughter Bei Wujin, so this meeting was definitely not friendly. Yuan Cheng was very nervous, but there was more excitement in his eyes. The Sword, the Arch, and the 5 Venerables had complicated looks in their eyes. They had initially wanted to seek refuge with the Cardinal Heaven, but now that they had become the enemies of the Cardinal Heaven, their feelings were naturally different. When the raging flames dissipated, the figure of a Cardinal Heaven expert was revealed. His posture was domineering, and his eyes contained a disdainful sharpness. It was exactly the same as the Cardinal Heaven he had encountered on the training island. However, the main body's aura was stronger and could shake the entire universe. He looked at all of the lords, and his gaze paused on Zhou Xuanji for a moment. Just this moment was enough for everyone to catch it. The other lords all looked at Zhou Xuanji with strange gazes. This fellow is dead for sure. That was what they all thought. The faces of Yuan Cheng and the 5 sword sovereigns darkened. They felt a pressure that felt like the sky was collapsing. They felt an earth-shattering pressure. Cardinal Heaven's gaze finally landed on the evil emperor. The 2 overlords of the northern endless region stared at each other, causing the air to freeze. Evil Emperor, it seems like under my pressure, your cultivation has broken through again. Cardinal Heaven laughed mockingly. He had always looked down on the evil emperor. In his opinion, the later primeval exalted 3 heavens were the true existences that should dominate the boundless universe, and the current juniors should make way for them. The evil emperor shook his head and smiled. I wonder when Senior will be able to recover to his peak. I can't wait. The Cardinal Heaven expert's voice. The sovereign's eyes turned. Zhou Xuanji was very curious about how high their cultivations were. Just this sort of verbal battle made the divine energy within his body restless and uneasy. The Cardinal Heaven expert didn't explode. Instead, he looked at everyone and said, Today, I have gathered everyone here for the sake of the stability of the North Boundless Realm. Currently, the North Boundless Realm is in turmoil and needs stability. Everyone here is ambitious, so why don't we decide on a ranking? The heroes' expressions changed. They didn't reply immediately. In this chaotic world, not all lords relied on their own strength to climb to power. Some relied on intelligence or personal charisma. If it was purely based on strength, what kind of bean soup could they get? Tang Xuanwu coldly snorted and said, According to what you said, the bigger the fist, the bigger the territory. What kind of logic is that? Some people inherited their domains from their elders. They might not be strong, but their governing abilities are outstanding. The people under them live very peacefully. If it was someone else, the people might fall into an abyss of suffering. His words caused many lords to nod their heads. It would be best if someone took the lead to contradict a Cardinal Heaven expert. They all refused to submit to a Cardinal Heaven expert. If he had, he would have long sought refuge in the Cardinal Heaven and never appeared here again. The evil emperor laughed. Senior, in terms of strength, I'm afraid the entire Northern Boundless should belong to me. The current you is not my match. His eyes were burning as if he was provoking a Cardinal Heaven expert and forcing him to make a move. Everyone was shocked. The heroes suddenly recalled that the demonic emperor was the true overlord of the Northern Endless Lands. A Cardinal Heaven expert glanced at the evil emperor and said with a faint smile, Junior, do you really think you're my match? Boom! The sovereign star suddenly shook violently. Everyone turned around and saw the sea of flames covering the surface of the planet descend and connect to the horizon. Since everyone is unconvinced, then let's fight to the death here. Whoever can kill me will break this formation. Cardinal Heaven laughed wildly, his tone filled with disdain. The evil emperor frowned. Could it be that this guy had already recovered to his peak? Otherwise, how could he be so arrogant? My people, come out. Cardinal Heaven raised his head and cried out. Just as he spoke, black holes appeared under the sea of flames, and figures giving off terrifying auras stepped out. Zhou Xuanji's pupils constricted. Venomous centipedes. They were the venomous centipedes he had encountered on the training island. Back then he had killed over 10,000 venomous centipedes, but he could not tell which was the real one. He did not expect more venomous centipedes to appear. At a glance, the sky was filled with countless venomous centipedes. These venomous centipedes were exactly the same as the ones he had seen before. They were bare-chested and had disheveled hair. Lightning seemed to be wrapped around their muscles. Everyone took out their enchanted artifacts and prepared to fight. This guy is indeed a ferocious war beast nurtured by a cardinal heaven, Yuan Cheng said with gritted teeth. He had seen venomous centipedes on the training island and felt that it was strange. The Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns frowned as well. Zhou Xuanji looked at Wu Yin and asked with a smile, "What do you think we should do now?" Wu Yin muttered, "Fight. This is your best chance to become one of the overlords of the northern continent. Cardinal Heaven cannot destroy all the overlords." His eyes locked onto the venomous centipedes and no one knew what he was thinking. "Since it's like this, let's fight." Zhou Xuanji got up slowly. The suppressive might sword and Thousand Realms chaotic hegemon execution sword appeared in his hands. He activated the sword fusion technique, and the legendary sword throne entered his body. His explosive aura attracted many people's attention. Cardinal Heaven and the evil emperor also glanced at him. The 7 great sovereigns had such an aura. He has indeed become more powerful. Cold sweat covered Daozong Xian's forehead. He was not as powerful as Zhou Xuanji. What should he do next? At the same time, thousands of venomous centipedes swooped down toward the massive stone statues. The evil emperor also attacked. His opponent was naturally a cardinal heaven. Their palms collided, and a berserk aura swept out in all directions. Even though Zhou Xuanji's aura was fully unleashed, he was still sent flying back. What kind of power is this? His eyes widened and his heart was filled with shock. Chapter 985. Even someone as powerful as Zhou Xuanji was sent flying by the battle auras of the evil emperor and cardinal heaven cultivators, let alone those who were weaker than Zhou Xuanji. The stone statues shattered one after another, and the centipede's silhouette dashed through the sea of clouds. Everyone was engaged in battle. Zhou Xuanji was also targeted by a centipede. The 5 sword emperors stood in front of him and helped him kill the centipede. He suddenly realized that the number of centipedes was still increasing. The black holes in the sky were still there, and some centipedes would come out from them from time to time. The evil emperor and cardinal heaven cultivators soared into the sky and fought in the sky. Their auras were extremely powerful, and they used all kinds of divine abilities easily. Countless abnormal phenomena appeared. Sometimes flowers fell from the sky and sometimes white cranes filled the sky. Dragons and phoenixes danced in the sky, and the scenery changed. The cardinal heaven cultivators blocked all of the evil emperor's attacks with their palms. The evil emperor wielded a black halberd. As he swung it, black lightning coiled around him. He was so insufferably arrogant. In front of his fighting posture, everyone couldn't help but revere him. Zhou Xuanji did not attack under the protection of the 5 sword emperors. He looked at the battle between the evil emperor and cardinal heaven cultivators, hoping to learn something. Yuan Cheng stood beside him and said with gritted teeth, "They are too powerful. If not for us restraining ourselves, we might all die." "Why restraining ourselves?" Zhou Xuanji asked in astonishment. Killing them all was a good thing for the evil emperor and cardinal heaven cultivators. They must be threatening them with the other endless worlds. "They want to subdue us," Yuan Cheng replied. Wu Yin nodded and said, "The relationship between the 4 endless worlds is very subtle. Among them, the ancient geniuses are determined to conquer the 4 endless worlds. Outside the 4 endless worlds, many other factions are restless. The endless world is boundless, and the overlords of the 4 endless worlds have yet to truly control it." The division of the 4 endless worlds was only a rough division. It did not really divide the endless world into 4 regions. Zhou Xuanji thought with narrowed eyes. This meant that the cardinal heaven cultivators might have taken a liking to him. What was the purpose of this battle? At this moment, the cardinal heaven cultivator raised his right arm with a savage smile. Countless flames burst out from his palm and turned into fire phoenixes with a wingspan of 3,000 meters, sweeping across the surroundings. These fire phoenixes flew toward the evil emperor from all directions. The flames burned fiercely and the space distorted. The temperature of the entire sovereign star skyrocketed, and Zhou Xuanji's body was visibly turning red. Everyone looked over in horror. The power contained in those fire phoenixes was enough to make them shiver. Surrounded by the fire phoenixes, the demonic emperor's expression did not change. He brandished the black halberd and afterimages appeared one after another, dazzling everyone's eyes. Strong winds wreaked havoc and destroyed the fire phoenixes one after another. His moves might not be as shocking as those of a cardinal heaven expert, but they were invincible. He suddenly stopped, raised his left hand, and an exaggerated giant axe appeared in his hand. The axe was 6 meters long, and its blade was sharp like a piece of dark green cold iron. He waved the dark green axe, and all the fire phoenixes were absorbed into the axe's blade. Cardinal Heaven. This is no longer your era. The post-ancient venerated 3 heavens is a joke in front of the 4 overlords. The demonic emperor laughed arrogantly. He was in high spirits. He turned and rushed towards the Cardinal Heaven. He crossed thousands of miles with a single step and arrived in front of a Cardinal Heaven expert. His long spear was like a dragon as it pointed straight at the Cardinal Heaven expert's throat. Bang! A layer of raging flames ignited on the surface of the Cardinal Heaven expert's body and forcefully blocked the long halberd. However, the raging flames suddenly drilled into the dark green axe. The demonic emperor smirked and pierced the black halberd into the Cardinal Heaven expert's throat. The Cardinal Heaven expert did not panic but smiled condescendingly. "Junior, you know nothing about power," the Cardinal Heaven said with a soft laugh. Just as he spoke, a horrifying suction force was generated from his body and sucked the demonic emperor into it. The entire process happened too quickly, and the demonic emperor could not react in time. Tang Xuanwu, who was looking for an opportunity to attack, opened his eyes wide and cried out in shock. "What did you do?" The Cardinal Heaven turned to look at him and said with a smile, "This is my divine ability. It can devour everything. I'm the heavenly law's true form, and my cultivation has surpassed the imperishable realm. How can you juniors compete with me?" After speaking, the Cardinal Heaven raised his right hand. Screech! A phoenix's cry exploded out, and a fire phoenix descended from the sky. Tang Xuanwu's expression changed drastically, and he instinctively raised his arms to block. Boom! He was hit by the fire phoenix and fell into the sea of clouds. Zhou Xuanji also saw the demonic emperor being devoured. For some reason he felt that the Cardinal Heaven divine ability was somewhat familiar. Wait. The Cardinal Heaven did not kill them. Could it be that he wanted to devour them alive? Zhou Xuanji's expression changed. Not only him but so did Yuan Cheng and Wordless. They all thought of this. It can't be. Yuan Cheng mumbled with a trembling voice as he trembled. Don't resist. Zhou Xuanji said with a deep voice. He immediately enveloped Yuan Cheng and the others with his sovereign divine power. The next second he entered godly emptiness state and jumped out of the sovereign star. The Cardinal Heaven looked up and said in astonishment, "Godly emptiness state. I didn't expect a junior to be able to master such an immortal miracle." He immediately disappeared from his original spot. In godly emptiness state. Seeing the space-time kaleidoscope around them, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. "My lord is the best. You can directly." Yuan Cheng praised. Before he could finish, his expression froze. The Cardinal Heaven appeared above their heads and looked down at them. "Juniors, where do you think you can run to?" The Cardinal Heaven said with a cold laugh. His gaze fell on Zhou Xuanji, and his murderous intent materialized like 2 beams of cold light that landed on Zhou Xuanji's face. Zhou Xuanji looked up and took a deep breath. "You want to kill me? You don't deserve to die. It's you who deserves to die. You have a fiery temper just like me back then. But do you have my serendipity?" Zhou Xuanji held both swords and activated the Sword Emperor Absolute Art. Boom! The Cardinal Heaven's robe shook violently, and the space-time kaleidoscope around him exploded before returning to its original state. Zhou Xuanji frowned. His Sword Emperor Absolute Art did not cause any damage to the Cardinal Heaven. This was the first time the Sword Emperor Absolute Art lost. If he was powerful enough to injure a Cardinal Heaven, then the post-ancient Sovereign 3 Heavens would be too weak. "You have great talent indeed," the Cardinal Heaven praised, "but you have to die for offending me." He raised his right palm and slammed down. In the blink of an eye, 2 faded pearls flew out from Zhou Xuanji's head and blocked the Cardinal Heaven's palm. Boom! The Cardinal Heaven was sent flying backward by his own palm. His expression changed drastically as he looked at the 2 faded pearls in disbelief. Yuan Cheng and the Sword Emperor, who were in despair, were also shocked. They stared at the faded pearls with squinted eyes. "What's this?" The Cardinal Heaven cried out in shock. His expression was extremely unsightly as he slammed his palm again. The billowing flames engulfed Zhou Xuanji and the others. The 2 faded pearls created a sphere of light that protected them from the flames. Chapter 986. What a powerful bead, Autarch Gale murmured. The other 4 autarchs nodded numbly, all of them frightened. Yuan Cheng and Wu Yen stared at the faded fate pearl. They racked their brains but still couldn't figure out what kind of treasure it was. Cardinal Heaven experts fell into a violent rage. They waved their palms frantically and continuously attacked the light ball created by the faded fate pearl, shaking the surrounding spacetime kaleidoscopes. No matter how he attacked, the ball of light only fluctuated and did not shatter. Zhou Xuanji was also stunned by the faded fate pearl's power. He had guessed that the faded fate pearl could resist a Cardinal Heaven expert, but he didn't expect it to be so powerful. Yuan Cheng and the others were dumbfounded. His opponent was a Cardinal Heaven expert, a legend of the boundless universe. He couldn't even break through the defense of this treasure. This was too ridiculous. Zhou Xuanji was not immersed in his pleasant surprise. He felt that this couldn't go on. Who knew when the Cardinal Heaven would break through the ball of light created by the faded encounter pearl? Once again he entered the spiritless state and advanced quickly. "Where do you think you're going?" shouted the furious Cardinal Heaven expert. If news of what happened today spread, it would definitely become a humiliation for him. At the thought of this, his anger rose to a new peak. He flipped his right hand over and a black tower appeared in his hand. The black tower rapidly flew over and with a boom, it instantly became 30,000 meters tall. The black tower smashed onto the ball of light with the force of Mount Tai. Zhou Xuanji and the others lost their balance. The two faded pearls trembled violently and the light balls fluctuated. It was obvious that they were very unstable. Zhou Xuanji's heart sank. "It's over. This guy is crazy. He really wants to hunt us down to the end," Yuan Cheng said with a trembling voice, his expression terrified. He didn't want to die and neither did the others. They didn't want to be tortured to death by a Cardinal Heaven expert. With the ability of a ultimate heaven, he would definitely keep their souls and slowly torture them to vent his hatred. There were many such rumors circulating in the northern boundless region. Zhou Xuanji was also thinking of a way. He hesitated as to whether he should enter the absolute time realm directly. However, he felt that a Cardinal Heaven expert could also enter the absolute time realm. At this moment, the two faded fate pearls suddenly entered Zhou Xuanji's body. Zhou Xuanji gave off a brilliant radiance, and Yuan Cheng and the others instinctively closed their eyes. Boom. Zhou Xuanji could not see and could only hear deafening explosions around him. Soon he could no longer sense the aura of a Cardinal Heaven expert. About 5 breaths of time passed. He regained control of his body. He slowly opened his eyes and found himself floating in a dusky universe. There were many stars of different sizes floating in all directions. Yuan Cheng, Speechless, and Sword Monarch were all around him, nervously closing their eyes. "This is," Zhou Xuanji mumbled. He looked around in confusion, feeling both nervous and curious. Just now his senses were blocked, so he didn't know what had happened. Was this another universe or was it under the control of a Cardinal Heaven? Even though the faded fate pearl was magical, he wasn't 100% sure that it could lead them away from the pursuit of a Cardinal Heaven expert. The others opened their eyes. Yuan Cheng asked in surprise, "We've escaped?" Speechless looked at Zhou Xuanji with curiosity. The 5 sword sovereigns were all excited, and all of them had the expression of someone who had just survived a calamity. Zhou Xuanji said in a deep voice, "Be careful, the Cardinal Heaven cultivators might be nearby." Everyone nodded and looked in all directions. After a long time, a Cardinal Heaven expert had yet to appear. "We really did escape," Yuan Cheng said with a complicated expression. The previous experience was too frightening. Facing a frenzied Cardinal Heaven, they could only tremble. Speechless sighed in amazement. Any treasure can exist in the boundless universe. It's unimaginable. The post-ancient sovereign 3 heavens were so powerful. Even if a Cardinal Heaven expert had not recovered to his peak, he was still invincible. Zhou Xuanji relied on the 2 pearls to defend against the Cardinal Heaven's violent attacks. They wanted to know the origin of the faded fate pearl, but they didn't dare to ask. Zhou Xuanji was their lord. How could their subordinates ask? "Let's go and see if we can go back." Zhou Xuanji looked around and said softly. He spread out his divine sense but couldn't encompass the entire universe. It was boundless. He captured a special energy that permeated the universe. It was light and gentle. Could this be the boundless universe's void zone? Yuan Cheng said in shock. He frowned and took out a stone book. The stone book looked very ordinary, but it had the carvings of a book. There were dozens of strange and incomprehensible words on the surface. Everyone looked at the stone book. The Book of Circumference. "There are less than 10 books in the entire boundless universe and you have one," Speechless said in amazement. Yuan Qing felt proud of himself and said with a smile, "That's right. This book came from the Void Zone. It's impervious to all spells and can even sense the ripples at the edge of the universe. The ripples in the Void Zone are the most intense." The five sovereigns looked at each other in dismay. Including Zhou Xuanji, they had all heard of the Void Zone. There were boundaries in the boundless universe. These boundaries were boundless, like an independent, endless universe. "How do we leave this place?" Zhou Xuanji asked. Yuan Qing replied, "I have the Book of Circumference. We can rely on its guidance. But it's hard to determine which boundless we will reach." Having heard this, Zhou Xuanji frowned. He didn't want to go to the other three boundless universes. He looked at Speechless and said, "You came from the East boundless universe. You should know how to identify the direction of the boundless universes, right?" Speechless shook his head and said, "I was sent here by a powerhouse. Only imperishable stage cultivators can see the direction of the boundless universes." Zhou Xuanji's heart sank again. Just the North boundless universe made him feel like he could never fly to the end. Now he might accidentally enter the other boundless universes. He suddenly thought of the Fated Pearl. He immediately called out to the Fated Pearl in his heart. Soon, the Fated Pearl flew out from between his brows. The Book of Circumference in Yuan Cheng's hand flew out uncontrollably and stuck to the Fated Pearl. "My treasure." Yuan Cheng was shocked. He was afraid that the Fated Pearl would swallow the Book of Circumference. It was also possible for treasures to swallow each other. Fortunately, he was overthinking. The Book of Circumference and the Fated Pearl soon separated. The strange words on the Book of Circumference became smaller and densely packed on the Fated Pearl. It replicated the Book of Circumference's ability. Speechless exclaimed. His eyes burned with passion. He really wanted to study the Fated Pearl. After the Book of Circumference returned to Yuan Cheng's hand, the Fated Pearl flew in a certain direction. Zhou Xuanji and the others immediately chased after it. "Seems like we can go back," Yuan Cheng said with a smile, but his expression was complicated. The Book of Circumference was his most powerful and mysterious treasure, but it was replicated by the Fated Pearl. He could not help but feel a sense of defeat. Zhou Xuanji ignored him and stared at the Fated Pearl. The strange words flowed into his eyes like illusions and continuously impacted his vision. Only he could see such a phenomenon. What is the Fated Pearl guiding me to? Zhou Xuanji thought in confusion. Chapter 987. The strange words that entered Zhou Xuanji's eyes were extremely profound, and he could not understand them. However, these words repeatedly crashed into his eyes and attacked his soul. After a while, he suddenly understood something. Could it be? He widened his eyes in disbelief. Ancestral voice. When he was studying these strange characters, he had a strange feeling that he was listening to the ancestral voice. Although it was not as strong, his intuition told him that these strange characters were the carriers of the ancestral voice. "Yuan Qing, what are the characters on Fang Yuan's book?" Zhou Xuanji could not help but ask. According to Yuan Qing, there was more than one circumference book. Moreover, the Book of Circumference came from the lawless region. Didn't that mean that there was a carrier of the Buddhist mantra in the lawless region? I don't know. I've studied it for billions of years, but I still haven't understood it. I don't think it's meant to express anything. It's just like words. Yuan Qing shook his head. Back then, he also felt that the words on the Fang Yuan book recorded a great opportunity. Unfortunately, his hopes were always dashed. Zhou Xuanji asked closely, "Where did you get the Fang Yuan shoe?" Yuan Qing could tell that Zhou Xuanji was just like him, attracted by the words on the scroll. "I obtained it by chance. The previous owner came back from the lawless zone with severe injuries. Even though he had the cultivation of the imperishable realm, he was exhausted to death. I took him in and helped him fulfill his wish. That was how I obtained this Book of Circumference." Recalling the past, Yuan Qing could not help but sigh. Supreme Zhen Huan asked curiously, "Who is that person?" Yuan Qing shook his head and said, "I can't say. I promised him this." The other Supremes refused to give up and started to question him. Zhou Xuanji continued to think about the ancestral voice's words. Those words had already been imprinted on his soul. As long as he wanted to look at them, they would appear in front of him. At the same time, they continued to follow the Fated Pearl. The Fated Fate Pearl's speed wasn't fast, so everyone could keep up with it easily. They were hoping that the Fated Fate Pearl would bring them back to the northern endless lands. But Zhou Xuanji felt that the Fated Fate Pearl was not taking them to the north. Perhaps it had something to do with the ancestral sound characters. After all, the fated Fate Pearl had first absorbed the ancestral sound characters. Even if it was the ancestral sound characters, he was willing to go. He had a premonition that the ancestral sound characters contained great opportunities. He might even be able to raise his ancestral sound to a whole new level. They had been flying in the unreachable area for several months. The fated pearl finally stopped. In front of them was a huge star that was even bigger than the sun. It was brown in color as if it was a desert. Zhou Xuanji and the others stopped and looked at the massive star in front of them warily. Be careful. I heard that there are dangers everywhere in the lawless zone. The reason they exist is because there is no way to control them, Yuan Cheng said with a grim expression. He looked at the huge star and felt his hair stand on end. There was definitely a terrifying danger hidden under the calmness. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "Let me test it first." The fated pearl entered his glabella. He took out the divine sword and threw it at the huge star. Whoosh! The oppressive divine sword sped forward like lightning. There was a loud bang. The gigantic star was pierced through by the divine sword of pressure. The two ends of the star stirred up billowing dust like two wisps of smoke. Supreme Fear cautiously said, "Are we overthinking things?" Yuan Cheng was a little embarrassed, but he still looked around cautiously. Zhou Xuanji stored the divine sword of pressure and created dozens of avatars that quickly entered the gigantic star. Although there are many dangers in the lawless zone, no one dares to venture into places that are not dangerous. Because those who come here are not weak. They will also feel that the calmer it is, the more dangerous it is, Yuan Cheng said worriedly. Speechless said. Then he walked towards the huge planet. Yuan Cheng curled his lip and looked at Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji nodded and led the group toward the gigantic star. When they were about to reach the chi layer of the gigantic star, it suddenly trembled. I told you. There must be something strange. Yuan Cheng cried out excitedly. Zhou Xuanji stared at him. What kind of tone was that? Yuan Cheng was frightened by him. He knew that he had said something inappropriate and quickly shut his mouth. At the same time, the avatars transmitted everything they saw into Zhou Xuanji's mind. In the depths of the planet there was a huge beast that was slumbering. The beast looked like a firebird. It had 3 heads and 2 pairs of wings. Its body was covered in blazing flames. Zhou Xuanji could sense the scorching aura when he saw the 3 firebirds. Not only that, but he also saw the 3 firebirds opening their beaks slightly and saying something silently. He carefully observed the beak of the 3 firebirds and was greatly inspired. The bird was speaking the ancestral voice. How could it be? Zhou Xuanji's body swayed and entered the ground. He came up to the 3 firebirds. Yuan Cheng and the others appeared beside him. Seeing the gigantic 3-headed firebird, they opened their eyes wide. Lawless fire god, Yuan Cheng mumbled with a pale face. Zhou Xuanji wanted to tame this lawless fire god. But he could sense that the lawless fire god was very powerful. Even if they attacked together, they might not be able to do it. Lawless fire god. An ancient ferocious beast that survived the primeval sovereign era. Let's leave quickly. Even if it's sleeping, we can't hurt it. We might even wake it up, Yuan Cheng said anxiously. Recalling the legends about the lawless fire god, he shuddered in fear. Zhou Xuanji looked at him with squinted eyes and asked, We're here. Why didn't it sense us? Yuan Cheng replied, Because we're too weak. When we're sleeping and insects come near, will it wake up and slap them to death? Yuan Cheng and the 5-sword emperor's eyelids twitched. This explanation was too hurtful to their pride. Is there no way to tame it? Zhou Xuanji asked. A ferocious beast that knew ancestral voice. He really wanted to obtain it and study it thoroughly. This guy might have swallowed the Book of Circumference. Junior, put away your arrogant thoughts. If you had not said this 100 billion years ago, you would already be dead. A hoarse voice came as though it had not spoken for a long time. It was hard to tell if it was a man or a woman. Everyone was shocked and looked at the lawless fire god. They saw that the lawless fire god had opened its eyes and was staring at them coldly. They were given a big fright and stepped back instinctively. Facing the lawless fire god's gaze, they were almost scared out of their wits. Even Zhou Xuanji felt a chill in his heart. It was too terrifying. What kind of gaze was that? Zhou Xuanji even felt that the lawless fire god was even more terrifying than a cardinal heaven. Senior. Sorry, we didn't know what's good for us. It's our first time in the lawless region. Please forgive us, Yuan Cheng said fearfully. He knelt down in the air and kowtowed to the lawless fire god. As Zhou Xuanji's subordinate, he naturally had to take responsibility for Zhou Xuanji's recklessness. He did not want to see Zhou Xuanji apologize. The lawless fire god closed its eyes and said, "Since it's like this, then stay with me. I'm not sleepy anyway. When I'm happy you can leave." Boom, the stars shook again. Zhou Xuanji could clearly sense that the space around him was sealed and he could no longer jump out. Chapter 988. After failing to seal the underground space with the fire god, Zhou Xuanji and the others fell into a panic. Facing the fire god, they felt like they were mere ants. The other party could destroy them with a flip of his hand. Zhou Xuanji tried to use the fated fate pearl to take them away. However, this time, the fated fate pearl did not appear, as if it did not exist and would not listen to his summons. Yuan Cheng's forehead was filled with sweat. The 5 sword sovereigns didn't dare to speak, their bodies tensed up. Speechless remained silent as well, staring at lawless fire god. No one knew what he was thinking. The unstoppable fire god's eyes were closed. It was unknown if he had fallen asleep. The atmosphere was extremely silent. The silence lasted for a month. Zhou Xuanji could not take it anymore and asked, "Senior, how can I make you happy?" Yuan Cheng hurriedly gave him a look, telling him not to act rashly. Zhou Xuanji stared at the lawless fire god and frowned. He wasn't being impulsive. It was just that this situation was too stifling and tormenting. The 5 sword emperors immediately prepared for battle. They were also furious. The fact that they dared to fight on the training island proved that they had guts. Rather than suffering like this, it was better to fight to the death. "If I want you to die, can you die?" The lawless flame god replied. He did not open his eyes and his tone was cold. Zhou Xuanji heard this and was immediately annoyed. He immediately used the sword fusion technique and charged at lawless fire god with the divine sword of might. When he arrived in front of Wu Fa fire god, he immediately executed the sword emperor absolute. This time, he infused the cold energy in his body into the absolute sword emperor sword and clashed head-on with the fire god. Bang! The uncontrollable fire god was instantly frozen. But it was only for an instant. Unable to melt the ice on the fire god's body, he did not move. He did not even open his eyes. The sword the arch definitely didn't cause any damage to him. "Is that all you can do?" Lawless fire god's voice came, provoking Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji once again used the sword emperor absolute art, and he continuously used other divine abilities, continuously bombarding Wu Wei fire god's body. Yuan Cheng and the others had to back off. They could not withstand Zhou Xuanji's aura. In front of lawless fire god, Zhou Xuanji seemed so weak. No matter how he attacked, he could not shake lawless fire god. In fact, he could not even reduce the flames on lawless fire god's body. Zhou Xuanji became angrier as he fought. He knew that the fire god was humiliating him. However, he could only try his best to escape. "Are all these monsters in the unreachable zone?" Yuan Cheng looked at Speechless and asked in despair. He felt that the unstoppable fire god was stronger than a cardinal heaven expert. It was no wonder that the primeval venerated 3 heavens were unable to unify the boundless universe. Currently, the 4 sides were in endless peace and didn't interfere with each other. It turned out that there were so many monsters in between. Speechless shook his head. This was also his first time seeing the fire god. Although he looked calm, he was actually panicking inside. He did not want to die either. It was just that his personality prevented him from showing his emotions. Zhou Xuanji blasted for 2 hours before stopping. The Tianxia map had an endless supply of supreme divine power. He was not afraid of exhausting it, but he pretended to be out of breath. He stared at the lawless fire god with a face full of sweat and gritted his teeth. "What are you trying to do? I want you to know the difference between us." "You are really weak," lawless flame replied. At this moment, Yuan Cheng and Wu Yen narrowed their eyes. They read between the lines. It seemed that the fire god did not want to kill them. "Is it fun to keep saying things like that?" Zhou Xuanji said with a savage expression. He thought of a possibility, but he was not sure. "Cardinal Heaven chased after you. If not for your treasure, how could you have escaped? Moreover, do you really think you have control over that treasure?" The fire god said again. "You came here because I lured the treasure away. It was not by accident." Hearing this, Zhou Xuanji's expression changed. Could it be that the fire god controlled the fated pearl through the ancestral voice? Thinking of this possibility, he could not help but shudder. "What's your purpose? Just say it. You are an old senior from the ancient sovereign era. Why beat around the bush?" Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and said. The others grew anxious too. What was most terrifying was to give hope and then despair. "Because you understand it, Lawless Fire God said. Ancestral voice? Zhou Xuanji frowned. He still did not understand. It was created by my master. For countless years, other than me, only that brat Buddha ancestor knows it. And your treasure is also my master's, the Fire God replied. Lawless Fire God replied. He paused for a moment before continuing. You can stay here and think about what you obtained earlier. The fated pearl and the ancestral voice came from the same source? Zhou Xuanji was shocked. Could it be that it was not because of his outstanding talent or heaven-defying luck, but because these two treasures were connected? He fell into deep thought. Yuan Qing, Wordless, and the Sword Emperor looked at each other. They could not understand. The sweat on Zhou Xuanji's face disappeared quickly. He sat down in the air and began studying the ancestral voice. The others did not dare to disturb him. They understood one thing. The danger was averted. They sat down and waited quietly. When they closed their eyes, the Fire God could not open his eyes. He stared at Zhou Xuanji intently. For a long time, Zhou Xuanji spent his time studying the ancestral voice. His family was in the Kunlun Origin Court, and the Kunlun Origin Court was in his soul. As for the star's domain, he did not have to worry about it. Time was meaningless here. At least, Zhou Xuanji did not mind. He stared at the ancestral sound characters over and over again, memorizing these obscure characters. He tried to match the words with the ancestral voice, but to no avail. He had a premonition. When he truly understood the ancestral voice, his cultivation would undergo a qualitative change. He began to try to match the words one by one. When all the words were matched, it might be an energy technique or a divine ability. Unknowingly, strands of silver light began to surround his body. His entire body seemed to be covered in a layer of divine radiance, dazzling and eye-catching. The Fire God opened his eyes. He looked at Zhou Xuanji and nodded slightly before closing his eyes again. Yuan Qing saw this. He was pleasantly surprised. It seemed that his master had encountered a serendipity. If Zhou Xuanji could obtain the Fire God's inheritance or support, he would not have to fear a sovereign heaven expert in the future. Calm down. I must not embarrass my master, Yuan Qing thought to himself and tried to calm himself down. Time continued to pass. The silver radiance on Zhou Xuanji's body grew brighter and brighter. Gradually, Yuan Qing and the others could no longer cultivate, because Zhou Xuanji was giving them an immense pressure. What is he learning? Wordless mumbled to himself. His eyes were filled with curiosity. Don't think about it. That is something you cannot imagine. He is transforming into the Hongmeng heaven, the Fire God said. With this, the seven opened their eyes wide. Even Wordless was stunned. Hongmeng heaven. Zhou Xuanji was from the Hongmeng heaven? Really? Yuan Qing asked excitedly. He's the Hongmeng heaven that is on par with sovereign heaven? He suddenly remembered that Zhou Xuanji said that he was from the Hongmeng heaven, but he did not believe him. Chapter 989. Hongmeng Heaven. After knowing Zhou Xuanji's identity, Yuan Qing and the Five Sword Emperors were incredibly excited. Is he the reincarnation of Hongmeng Heaven, or did he obtain Hongmeng Heaven's inheritance? Speechless could not help asking. If Zhou Xuanji was Hongmeng Heaven, why couldn't Cardinal Heaven recognize him? In the endless universe, everyone knew that the Cardinal Heavens cared about the primordial heavens the most. This was the concern of their competitors. Besides unifying the boundless universe, the Cardinal Heaven desired to defeat Hongmeng Heaven the most. Hongmeng Heaven doesn't have an inheritance. He is Hongmeng Heaven. The Lawless Flame God replied impatiently. If it were not for Zhou Xuanji, he would not even bother with these bugs. Speechless asked, Is Hongmeng Tian your master? Boom. A ball of flame crashed into Speechless, causing him to vomit blood and instantly become dispirited. I'm from the primeval era. How can the Hongmeng Heaven of the post-primeval venerable three heavens be worthy of being my master? The Lawless Flame God bellowed furiously. His voice was so loud that Yuan Qing and the others nearly fainted. Speechless quickly bowed. Yuan Qing cautiously said, Senior, I see that you're not sleepy yet. Why don't you tell us about the past so that we can admire your master or your glorious deeds? He looked at the Fire God with admiration. Unable Fire God was very pleased and began to tell them about his master. My master was once the sovereign of the Kunlun Origin Court. At that time there was no endless universe, only the Kunlun Origin Court. At that time the Kunlun Origin Court was only the size of a small world. The uncontrollable Fire God's voice was hoarse and full of vicissitudes. He brought Yuan Cheng and the others into that ancient era. The primogenitor created the Kunlun origin court and created all living beings. My master was the first generation of the primogenitor's son and also his direct disciple. When I became his disciple, the Kunlun origin court's supreme position had already been passed down for more than a dozen generations. In that era, the reign of the Supremes was counted in tens of thousands of years, unlike now, where the shortest is hundreds of millions of years, and the longest is billions of years. He told them how he became Master Mo's disciple. It was his master who opened his spiritual wisdom and helped him reach his current level. The more unstoppable fire god spoke, the more excited he became. He described the adventures he and his master had gone on, and everyone was fascinated by them. At that time, the universe wasn't as vast as the endless universe, and perhaps the battles weren't as intense as they were now. However, listening to the fire god's story made Yuan Cheng and the others' blood surge. Every legend that had shaken the past and present had once been as miserable as they were now. They had all been looked down upon, and they had all been in despair. Lawless fire god spoke for a long time, and Yuan Cheng and the others listened with great interest. The might that Zhou Xuanji gave off became more and more powerful. He was becoming more and more extraordinary. Senior, you've been talking for so long, why haven't you told me your master's name? Yuan Cheng asked curiously. The lawless flame god snorted, my master's title is after the post-primeval sovereign. No living being is worthy of knowing it. Yuan Cheng was puzzled. What kind of logic was this? You don't understand. The difference between the primeval era and the post-primeval era exists because of its logic. If you want to blame someone, blame the primeval era. But he's already dead, so you can't blame him even if you want to. The lawless flame god snorted coldly, which made everyone's heart itch. Wuyan muttered, I heard that the primeval sovereign fell because of something he did. After that, the endless universe exploded, reaching a truly boundless scale. Because of that, countless years after that, it could be said that there would never be a being who could unify the endless universe. Having heard this, Yuan Cheng and the 5 sword emperors looked at him in astonishment. This brat knew so many secrets? The Eastern Endless Royalty knows quite a lot. That's right. Back then, your old ancestor knelt down and begged for the primeval sovereign's forgiveness, which allowed you to flourish for a long time. The lawless flame god laughed coldly. His tone was mocking, which made Wuyan frown. Although his words were harsh, Wuyan was not angry and only pondered over his words. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, a series of explosions came from Zhou Xuanji's body. Everyone turned around and saw that he had already turned into a silver figure of light. His aura became more and more mysterious and vast. He succeeded, the lawless flame god mumbled. The unstoppable fire god murmured, his voice filled with gratification and anticipation. Yuan Cheng, Wuyan, and the Sword Emperor held their breaths in concentration. They did not know what Zhou Xuanji was comprehending, nor did they know how powerful Zhou Xuanji would become. They could only look forward to it. At the same time, Zhou Xuanji's mind exploded. After countless matches, he finally matched the ancestral voice with the ancestral voice words. At the same time, he comprehended an extraordinary energy technique. He was right. Ancestral voice was actually an energy technique. An energy technique that could allow one to enter a state of enlightenment. Constitution Defying Creation Sutra. He had entered a mysterious state. The sovereign's divine energy in his body began to circulate according to the Constitution Defying Creation Sutra. The divine energy began to change qualitatively as it absorbed the surrounding scorching energy. The flames on lawless flame god's body were absorbed into his body like a storm, creating a violent gust of heat. Constitution defying. He succeeded. Lawless flame god mumbled. His eyes were hazy as if he was thinking of something. He did not stop Zhou Xuanji from absorbing his energy, but Yuan Cheng and the others could not take it anymore. All of them retreated to the edge of the underground space. This heat was too horrifying. Even as great sovereigns, they could not withstand it. This kind of flame. Our Lord can absorb it. Sovereign Crimson Firmament cried out in shock. At this moment, he could not rejoice over Zhou Xuanji's improvement because if this continued, they would all be burned to ashes. As strong as Speechless and Yuan Cheng were, despair appeared on their faces. They did not expect that they would die during Zhou Xuanji's breakthrough. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji spoke suddenly, "Come to my side." Having heard him, everyone was stunned. They gritted their teeth and flew to Zhou Xuanji's side. Next they looked pleasantly surprised. So cool. Although Zhou Xuanji was surrounded by flames, He was giving off a soul-freezing cold chi. The clash of ice and fire made Yuan Cheng and the others feel very cool. At the same time, Zhou Xuanji's cultivation began to soar. He was charging toward the great sovereigns of the 8 courts. Countless swords appeared out of thin air and hovered above their heads. These swords were all the legendary swords that Zhou Xuanji owned. The swords spun and let out a roar. Zhou Xuanji was enveloped in flames, and no one could see Zhou Xuanji's condition. Zhou Xuanji was comprehending the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra. In the process of comprehension, his heart was empty. He did not understand the principles of cultivation but just entered a wondrous state. It was indescribable. It was indescribable. In this state he felt that he was omnipotent. The extremely destructive flames were just lively little creatures in his eyes. With a thought, these little creatures danced around him. Not only that, but the power of ice in his body was also jumping with joy. Ice and fire were originally at odds with each other, but now they were perfectly fused together, transforming into a new kind of energy. Chapter 990. In the underground space, the silver light shone on the cave walls, and there were occasional flashes of fire. Zhou Xuanji stood in the air and continued to comprehend the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra. Yuan Cheng, Wu Yan, and Sword Monarch did not dare to stray 5 feet away from him. The unstoppable fire god had already closed his eyes. The underground space fell into silence once more. Endless flames flowed out of the lawless fire god and entered Zhou Xuanji's body, helping him grow stronger. He was getting closer and closer to the supreme of the 8 courts. After a long while, there was a loud bang. He had finally broken through to become a supreme of the 8 courts. The lawless fire god's flames spiraled around Zhou Xuanji's body like a tornado. His supreme god force began to transform. The aura shook the underground space. Uncontrollable fire god suddenly opened his eyes and thought to himself, his comprehension speed is really fast. The intense flames on Zhou Xuanji's body quickly entered his body. He had appeared. The surface of his body glowed with a silver light that even his robes could not conceal. Yuan Cheng and the others opened their eyes and looked at him, all of them pleasantly surprised. Did he succeed? Zhou Xuanji, who looked like a man of silver light, opened his eyes slowly and said, "It's over." The end? Everyone was stunned and puzzled. What ended? Zhou Xuanji's eyes gave off a violet light, and an explosion sounded out as the underground space directly collapsed. The rocks turned into dust, and the dense fog in the outside world also disappeared, revealing a vast universe in front of everyone's eyes. The huge star they were on no longer existed. They widened their eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing. Zhou Xuanji was already powerful enough to shatter the fire god's power? They subconsciously looked at Wu Wu fire god. The lawless fire god had already opened his eyes. He unfurled his 2 pairs of wings and his 3 heads cried out in unison. The flames were incomparably fierce, even more dazzling and scorching than the sun, illuminating the entire void. The boundless light drove away the darkness, and the fog that permeated the universe quickly dissipated as if it had met its natural enemy. Yuan Cheng and the others could hear the surprise in fire god's voice. They breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the fire god wasn't angry, it was fine. Could it be that this planet is actually trapping him? Exalted Protector Vast Expanse whispered. The others also thought of this possibility. Otherwise the fire god would not have treated Zhou Xuanji so well. Zhou Xuanji turned and looked at Wu Wu fire god and said, "Thank you for your serendipity, senior." The fire god was overjoyed and said with a smile, "Actually, it's your serendipity. Zhou Xuanji, go back and create chaos in the boundless universe. Fulfill your ambition from back then." After saying that, the lawless fire god turned and left. In the blink of an eye, he transformed into a sun and disappeared into the ends of the universe. However, his light remained. Zhou Xuanji landed in front of Yuan Cheng and the others. The silver radiance around his body dissipated, revealing his true appearance. He didn't look any different from before, except that his temperament was even more mysterious. It was hard to describe, but it made people feel an indescribable reverence for him. "Congratulations on obtaining a great opportunity, my lord." Yuan Cheng cupped his fists and said with a smile. The others quickly followed to congratulate him. They were all very excited. Their master was Hongmeng Heaven, and now they had even obtained a fortuitous opportunity from the primeval era. They would surely soar with Zhou Xuanji in the future. "Let's go, it's time to go back." Zhou Xuanji chuckled and everyone looked at each other in dismay. They suddenly felt that Zhou Xuanji had changed. Before, Zhou Xuanji showed off his abilities. But now he was very calm. Zhou Xuanji summoned the fated fate pearls again. Looking at the 2 pearls, he said with a smile, "Now you should take me back, right?" The 2 fated fate pearls immediately led the way. Everyone immediately followed. Zhou Xuanji flew in front of Yuan Cheng and the others. He could feel the gazes behind him. He didn't care. In fact, he also understood his changes. He felt that it was a good thing. After comprehending the Constitutional Defiance Creation Sutra, his heart was completely settled. Shen Yanxing once said that the identity of Hongmeng Heaven would make him more arrogant and lose his original heart. Now it was just right. He had the Constitutional Defiance Creation Sutra to suppress the arrogance of Hongmeng Heaven. Sovereign Heaven, you and I will meet again soon. The corner of his mouth rose as he thought expectantly. Although his cultivation had only broken through to the 8 courts Great Sovereign, his strength had undergone a qualitative change with the Constitutional Defiance Creation Sutra. This technique had no small realm. As long as he chanted the ancestral voice, he could use the Constitutional Defiance Creation Sutra. Defy all rules. Create what you want. In the entire endless universe, only he and the ancestral Buddha could master the ancestral voice. Only by mastering the ancestral voice could one hope to learn the Constitution Defying Creation Scripture. After learning the ancestral sound, one would have to master the ancestral sound characters and fuse the 2 together. Without the help of the fated fate pearl, it would be impossible to do so. In other words, even the peak post-primeval 3 heavens did not have this kind of fortune. Yuan Cheng and Wu Yin stared at Zhou Xuanji's back. They were extremely curious, but they did not dare to ask. They could not ask about serendipity, they only wanted to know how powerful Zhou Xuanji was. If Zhou Xuanji faced a Cardinal Heaven cultivator again, would he be able to resist? The north was boundless. A space-time crack appeared and Zhou Xuanji and the others stepped out. Yuan Cheng held the Fengyuan book in his hand and said excitedly, "We're here. We're really here." The others were also very happy. Zhou Xuanji did not speak. He enveloped everyone with his sovereign divine power and entered spirit blankness mode before flying toward the stars field. Yuan Cheng was shocked in his heart. He could not even resist Zhou Xuanji's sovereign divine power. In a trance he was moved away. He was just about to speak. The space-time kaleidoscope around him suddenly disappeared. They exited the state of godless mind. So fast? Sovereign Crimson Sky cried out in shock. His face was filled with disbelief. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "The stars field is just closer." In fact, that was not the case. He had really become a lot faster. Below him was the stars field. The iconic Star River staircase still existed. Everything was very harmonious. The stars field did not encounter any danger. Zhou Xuanji made them tell him what had happened recently before they dispersed. Returning to the stars field again, they all felt as if they had been in another world. Zhou Xuanji entered the stars palace. As soon as he sat down, Shen Yanxing came into the palace. "How was it? Did the Cardinal Heaven make things difficult for you?" Shen Yanxing asked first. She looked at Zhou Xuanji and suddenly cried out in surprise. The more she looked, the more shocked she became. How is this possible? What kind of serendipity did this guy get? This aura, he hunted me down but I was lucky enough to escape, Zhou Xuanji said calmly, giving a brief account of his experience. Shen Yanxing took 2 steps forward. She furrowed her brow and asked, "Not only did you break through to the 8 courts Great Sovereign, but your aura transcended. It doesn't belong to this endless universe. What did you get?" She had lived for countless years and had seen some legendary powerhouses from the ancient sovereign era. All the creatures from the ancient sovereign era were very different from the creatures of the present, especially in terms of aura. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "There are some things that can't be said. You should understand this." In the past, Shen Yanxing loved to hide things from him. But now it was the other way around. This feeling was really good. Chapter 991. It's fine if you don't want to say it. There hasn't been any commotion from the Northern Endless Convention yet. However, the various powers in the Northern Endless Convention are already getting restless because their leaders haven't returned yet. Shen Yanxing curled her lips and then got down to business. Zhou Xuanji had left for over 1,000 years. In other words, it was very likely that the leaders of those forces had already died in the Northern Endless Convention. However, the strange thing was that there was no movement from the Cardinal Heaven forces. This worried everyone, but they didn't dare to act. Zhou Xuanji told them about what happened in the Northern Endless Meeting. As for what happened in the Lawless region, he decided to bury it in his heart. A Cardinal Heaven expert might have been seriously injured and is currently recuperating. As for the leaders of the other forces, they are either trapped or dead. This is your chance. While the people in the north are in a state of panic, if you make a rallying cry, the forces under you will greatly expand. Shen Yinxing said with a smile. It was as if she had seen the entire north belong to Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "Go and discuss it with Jincheng. We can do it now." Shen Yinxing nodded. She could see that Zhou Xuanji was no longer the same as before. She was very curious about how strong Zhou Xuanji was, but she didn't want to ask. She would keep it as a surprise in the future. Zhou Xuanji closed his eyes too. He wanted to rest for a while. He didn't want to think about anything and didn't want to cultivate. He just sat there quietly. On that day, the news of Zhou Xuanji's return shook the entire star domain. During this time, the All-Star realm was also worried about Zhou Xuanji. Fortunately, their sword sovereign had returned safely. Not only that, Zhou Xuanji also asked Jincheng to spread the word that Cardinal Heaven had used the Northern Endless Conference to murder the leaders of many factions. He wanted to officially declare war against Cardinal Heaven and sincerely invite all the powerful cultivators in the Northern Endless Conference to join. Once this news was released, North Wujin was shaken. Countless creatures were cursing Cardinal Heaven experts. The various forces began to elect a new master, and countless living beings rushed towards the multitude stars domain. So many faction lords had not escaped, and only Zhou Xuanji had. What did this mean? This meant that Zhou Xuanji was very powerful. He was so strong that even a Cardinal Heaven expert couldn't kill him. If he was lucky enough to escape, he would not dare to go against a Cardinal Heaven expert again. For a time, the multi-star domain welcomed an unprecedented liveliness. 10 years later, within the Kunlun Origin Court, Zhou Xuanji was instructing Zhou Tianyuan in cultivation. The mountain forest here was continuous and the sky was high and the ground was wide. The spiritual energy here was very abundant, and there were many birds circling above the forest. Zhou Xuanji sat on the edge of a cliff on a small mountain. He crossed his legs and looked at Zhou Tianyuan leisurely as he trained his sword. Zhou Tianyuan's posture was very stiff. He was sweating profusely as if he was under pressure that was hard to see with the naked eye. "Tianyuan, you can't even withstand this bit of pressure?" Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. Having heard him, Zhou Tianyuan gritted his teeth and swung his sword even faster. Now that Zhou Tianyuan had grown up, his face looked exactly like Zhou Xuanji's. The reason why it was so difficult for him to cultivate was because Zhou Xuanji's divine energy was pressing down on his body, helping him refine his body. Now, Zhou Tianyuan was already trying to break through to the Nine Vast Heavens realm. He was extremely talented and didn't embarrass Zhou Xuanji. His father, Zhou Tanhua, was already wandering in the north and didn't have much fame for the time being. Zhou Xuanji had even greater expectations for Zhou Tianyuan. Zhou Tanhua's temperament was too mild. He was not suitable to take over Zhou Xuanji's position. But Zhou Tianyuan could. This kid was ambitious, but he wasn't indecisive. There are more and more creatures in the stars domain. Should I let this kid go out and take a look? Zhou Xuanji fell into deep thought. Since he met Zhou Tianyuan, this kid had been staying in the Kunlun Origin Court to cultivate. He didn't have the freedom to dominate a world. But with Zhou Tianyuan's strength, he could only wander in the court realm. In the endless universe he was really weak. Forget it, let's wait until he becomes an Origin Fusion Divine Lord. Zhou Xuanji shook his head. He didn't want his grandson to take risks. He continued to watch Zhou Tianyuan cultivate. After a while, Shen Yinxing's voice reached his ears. "Someone needs you to meet him." Having heard this, Zhou Xuanji immediately returned to the star's palace. He opened his eyes and saw Shen Yinxing standing in the palace. "Who is it?" Zhou Xuanji asked. He noticed the smile on Shen Yinxing's face. Did an expert come to seek shelter? Recently, a steady stream of creatures had been joining the star's domain every day. The Sword Emperors and the Five Sovereigns were also annexing the surrounding domains. Even the Dragon Follower domain, which had lost its heart of hidden Taoist, belonged to Zhou Xuanji. Under such circumstances, some well-known experts came to seek shelter one after another. An Undying Realm expert. He wants to see your strength. You also know this guy Hongqin Saint Lord, Shen Yinxing said with a smile. Hearing this, Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. Hongqin Saint Lord. He thought that this guy was dead. Back then he learned the Saint Rainbow Monarch Dao under Hongqin Saint Lord, which offended Gu Tianlin. Now Gu Tianlin was only left with his soul, imprisoned in the Kunlun sword. Everything was an ill-fated relationship. Let him in, Zhou Xuanji said with a chuckle. Shen Yinxing nodded and disappeared. Then only Hong Qin Saint Lord came in. He was still so elegant, so calm. He looked at Zhou Xuanji with a complicated look in his eyes. He bowed first and then said, "Sword Emperor, long time no see. It has only been a few thousand years and you have already become a big shot in the north. Amazing." Zhou Xuanji didn't get up. He sat on the throne, waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm not a big shot. For a junior like me you are a big shot. If you can join the stars' domain it will be a great thing for me." Hong Qin Saint Lord calmly nodded and said, "Before that let's spar. I want to see your strength." Zhou Xuanji nodded. With a stroke of his right hand, he tore open a spatial crack and said, "Let's find a quiet place to fight." It was the first time he knew that Hong Qin Saint Lord was an undying realm expert. That's right. If he didn't have the strength he would have been killed by Gu Tianlin long ago. It would be even more impossible for him to stop the resurrection of a cardinal heaven expert. Hong Qin Saint Lord nodded and took the lead to step into the spatial crack. Zhou Xuanji followed closely behind. The two came into the space-time turbulence. Zhou Xuanji took out the suppressive sword and the Thousand Realms chaotic hegemon execution sword. His body radiated a silver light as his aura suddenly changed. Hong Qin Saint Lord's expression changed and said in astonishment, "This is..." A strange voice came from Zhou Xuanji's body. It sounded like someone was chanting scriptures or Tao. The language was hard to understand and it felt very profound. Zhou Xuanji came up to him with a single step and activated the Sword Emperor Absolute Art. Boom! Hong Qin Saint Lord was blasted away. His robe fluttered in the wind, and his expression turned grave. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes and thought to himself, an undying realm expert indeed. He can take a Sword Emperor Absolute Art head-on. But I'm not serious yet. He charged toward Hong Qin Saint Lord again. Hong Qin Saint Lord activated the Saint Rainbow Monarch Way straightaway. His aura became erratic and a faint white radiance enveloped his body. He took out a folding fan that was as tall as him and waved it toward Zhou Xuanji. Chapter 992. Bang! Hong Qin Saint Lord waved his fan, and a river appeared out of nowhere. It gave off a majestic aura as it rushed towards Zhou Xuanji, and even the space-time lightning avoided it. Zhou Xuanji raised his sword to block. His sword chi exploded and dispersed the river. The splashing water droplets penetrated his sword chi and landed on his body, scorching. Zhou Xuanji immediately activated the icy power in his body to counteract the heat from the water droplets. However, Hong Qin Saint Monarch kept waving his fan and countless water droplets landed on his body. Zhou Xuanji used godly supreme speed and came behind Hong Qin Saint Lord. He raised his two swords high and slashed down furiously. The Sword Emperor Extinction erupted as well. Boom! Hong Qin Saint Monarch was blasted down by him, his hair fluttering in the wind. Zhou Xuanji quickly swung his sword, and the constitutional defying creation sutra continued to reverberate in his body. His sword chi fell like a boundless ocean. It was incredibly sharp and could tear everything apart. Hong Qin Saint Lord looked up and once again waved his fan. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his lips. It was evident that he had been injured by Zhou Xuanji. The sword chi collided with the strong wind, causing the surrounding space-time electric currents to dance wantonly like a group of rampaging snakes. Zhou Xuanji, you are indeed different from before. However, you seem to have abandoned my Saint Rainbow Monarch Tao. Hong Qin Saint Monarch bellowed. His hair fluttered and his expression was incomparably cold. Seeing Zhou Xuanji use a divine ability that he did not understand, he felt quite angry in his heart. Before he came, he thought that Zhou Xuanji had relied on his Saint Rainbow Lord Tao to get to where he was today. But now, it seemed that Zhou Xuanji had long since stopped using the Saint Rainbow Lord Tao. The Saint Rainbow Monarch Tao was his life's greatest achievement. How could he abandon it? It's not that I've abandoned it, but I've created a better sword Tao, Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. These words agitated Hong Qin Saint Lord even more. Hong Qin Saint Lord took the initiative to attack. He passed through the space-time lightning and came before Zhou Xuanji. He formed a seal with both hands, and the Monarch Tao of the Holy Rainbow completely erupted as his speed reached its peak. Using his palm as a blade, he continued to clash with Zhou Xuanji's sword. His speed was increasing and so was Zhou Xuanji. It was Zhou Xuanji's first time facing an imperishable realm cultivator. He began chanting the constitution-defying creation scripture. He used his soul to recite the scripture of creation. He was able to maintain a state of enlightenment while listening to the ancestral voice. In this state of enlightenment, his speed was extremely fast, surpassing his limits. Even when facing the undying realm Rainbow Qin Saint Monarch, he could easily keep up. With the constitution-defying creation scripture, my strength is already comparable to the undying realm. Zhou Xuanji understood it in his heart. He smiled and channeled the sovereign's divine power in his body into the suppressive sword. As he dodged Hong Qin Great Monarch's attacks, he began to accumulate his power. It's time for my sword Dao to shine, Zhou Xuanji thought. He immediately created hundreds of great Li avatars and surrounded Hong Qin Saint Lord. Boom, 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 he performed the absolute sword of the Sword Emperor together with all the Dali clones. A terrifying formless power pressed down on Hong Qin's sacred monarch from all directions. Hong Qin's sacred lord gritted his teeth and circulated his divine power to block the absolute Sword Emperor. This brat's strength? How did he suddenly become so much stronger? Rainbow Qin Saint Monarch was astonished. He had already used all his strength to defend, but he was still showing signs of being unable to withstand it. How could this be? Zhou Xuanji suddenly came above his head, and 9 figures of light appeared behind Zhou Xuanji. Sword Soul. A sword soul that contained endless power of creation. Creation is destruction. Swoosh. The 9 sword souls disappeared at the same time. Hong Qin's sacred lord was struck and vomited a mouthful of blood before falling backward. Too fast. This move had already surpassed the definition of speed. Hong Qin's sacred lord could not dodge at all. He felt that the divine power in his body was sucked out, and the protection of his body was broken. He was almost smashed into pieces. So powerful. Such domineering power, Hong Qin's sacred lord was shocked. He suddenly thought of Cardinal Heaven. When he encountered a Cardinal Heaven who had just been revived, he was just as shocked. Senior, my attack has just begun. Are you ready? Zhou Xuanji's cold voice came into his ears. He opened his eyes wide and realized that Zhou Xuanji had appeared behind him again. When did this happen? In the Star's Palace, Zhou Xuanji walked out from the spatial crack. He returned to his throne and sat down. Next, Hong Qin's sacred lord walked out. Hong Qin's sacred lord had already changed into a new robe. But his face was pale and his aura was weak. Zhou Xuanji called Jinsheng over. Jinsheng was stunned when he saw Hong Qin's sacred lord. He knew Hong Qin's sacred lord. They had met once before. He's injured. Jinsheng was astonished. He thought that Hong Qin's sacred lord was here to ask for help. Zhou Xuanji instructed, Jinsheng, bring Hong Qin's sacred lord down and arrange a place for him to stay. Later on I will assign him a position. From now on he will be a member of our star's realm. Jinsheng nodded. He was confused, but he still brought Hong Qin's sacred lord away obediently. Hong Qin's sacred lord turned around and glanced at Zhou Xuanji. His eyes looked complicated and somewhat resentful. Zhou Xuanji watched them leave with a smile. Not bad. The imperishable stage is really powerful. Zhou Xuanji was in a good mood. At the end of the battle, he had witnessed the imperishable stage. It turned out that the imperishable stage was not only a cultivation stage but also a sublimation of divine abilities. Hong Qin's sacred lord's imperishable stage was really powerful. The boundless splashes of water and the boundless murderous intent were enough to make anyone fall into despair. If my Sword Emperor absolute technique reaches the imperishable stage, then Zhou Xuanji fell into a wonderful fantasy. He decided that his next cultivation direction would be the imperishable realm. It was not difficult for him to become a great sovereign of the 9 courts. It would happen sooner or later. What he really cared about was how to cultivate the Sword Emperor absolute technique to the imperishable stage. After the thought, he closed his eyes slowly. Hong Qin's sacred lord joining the star's realm shook dozens of nearby realms. After all, this powerhouse was extremely famous in the northern boundless realm. Not only was he the sovereign of the Kunlun origin court, but he had also nurtured many powerful cultivators. Although they were not teacher and disciple in everyone's eyes, he had students all over the world. It was only after he met Gu Tianlin that he stopped teaching other living beings. Hong Qin's sacred lord made Zhou Xuanji famous again. The living beings who came to worship him grew more and more powerful. Almost every day a grand supreme would come. Other than the great sovereigns of the 9 courts or famous cultivators, Zhou Xuanji would not receive them personally. No one felt that he was putting on airs. His position in everyone's hearts had been growing. This day, Jincheng received news that the Cardinal Heaven Army had appeared again, and their scale was still expanding. Zhou Xuanji immediately sent the Sword Emperor and the 5 sovereigns to lead the army. In the Star's Palace, Jincheng said expectantly, "My lord, now that you have mastered more and more realms, and the name of the Sword Emperor resounds in the northern boundless realm, shouldn't you give your force a name?" A name was also a banner for Zhou Xuanji's subordinates. It could increase their cohesion. "I am the Sword Emperor. Let's call it the Sword Emperor Divine Court," Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. Zhou Xuanji said with a smile. Jincheng heard him and immediately became excited. No matter what name Zhou Xuanji gave it, he felt that it was good, because this name would represent Zhou Xuanji's will. Chapter 993. The name of the Sword Emperor Divine Court quickly spread to all the domains under Zhou Xuanji's control. At the same time, under Zhou Xuanji's instructions, Jincheng created a flag that belonged solely to the Sword Emperor Divine Court. It was a black flag with hundreds of divine sword patterns imprinted on it. It looked like a blooming sword flower. The Sword Emperor flag would become the symbol of the Sword Emperor Divine Court. The establishment of the name and flag caused the unity and morale of the various domains to grow stronger. Zhou Xuanji spent most of his time cultivating in the Star Hall, leaving the battles to his generals. Several years later, Jincheng sent the report to Zhou Xuanji. "My lord, a Cardinal Heaven expert has appeared. What should we do?" Jincheng asked anxiously. Even though the Sword Emperor Divine Court was developing rapidly, the might of a Cardinal Heaven was still monstrous, and it was still a nightmare for all living beings. Zhou Xuanji got up and said, "Call Hongqin Saint Lord to come with me." When Jincheng heard this, he instantly became excited. He immediately obeyed the order and turned around to leave. Since Zhou Xuanji dared to fight against a Cardinal Heaven expert, it meant that he had become much more powerful. Previously, he had heard from Yuan Cheng that Zhou Xuanji was very different from before. He had some expectations in his heart, but he was not sure. As long as Zhou Xuanji was confident, he would be confident too. Over the next period of time, the news that the Sword Emperor was going to personally fight a Cardinal Heaven expert spread like wildfire in the Sword Emperor Divine Court. This greatly boosted the morale of the Sword Emperor Divine Court. The creatures fighting everywhere became fearless. Zhou Xuanji and Hongqin Saint Lord soon met. The two of them did not follow the reinforcements and instead rushed to the front lines. Zhou Xuanji activated the spiritless state and quickly advanced with Hongqin Saint Lord. The legendary ethereal state, Hongqin Saint Lord felt quite dazed, and his gaze toward Zhou Xuanji became even more complicated. Zhou Xuanji smiled at him and said, "Before, we failed to stop the revival of Cardinal Heaven. Today let us work together to destroy Cardinal Heaven." Hearing this, Saint Hongqin came back to his senses and nodded lightly. Now was not the time to be curious. His face darkened at the thought of the Cardinal Heaven. Now that the Cardinal Heaven had brought disaster to Beiwujin, he felt that he was partly responsible for the chaos that had befallen Beiwujin. The godly absent state was incredibly fast, and in less than the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, Zhou Xuanji and Lu Shisui arrived at the front lines. In this broken universe, countless living beings were fighting and killing each other. There were also many ferocious beasts larger than stars wreaking havoc. Divine abilities exploded and magic treasures showed their might. The roar was deafening. Zhou Xuanji immediately locked onto a Cardinal Heaven expert. He stood on a sinister-looking carriage and laughed wildly. A Cardinal Heaven expert was like a devil that could destroy everything. He wore a black robe and was surrounded by evil energy. He also saw Zhou Xuanji, and a ferocious light appeared in his eyes. "Zhou Xuanji, you came just in time. I was waiting for you to die." Cardinal Heavenly Fury laughed. He could sense Zhou Xuanji's transformation and was shocked. This kid really obtained a great fortuitous encounter. To be able to save Zhou Xuanji from his hands was definitely a great serendipity. He could not help but feel jealous of Zhou Xuanji. Why did this kid have so many lucky chances at such a young age? When he was Zhou Xuanji's age, he did not have any fame, let alone fighting for supremacy in the northern endless continent. With 2 legendary swords in his hands, Zhou Xuanji's entire body was radiating with a silver radiance. His aura was imposing. Hongqin Great Lord took out his treasured fan, and the two of them rushed towards the Cardinal Heaven realm at the same time. There was a loud bang. The cardinal heaven blocked the unstoppable Zhou Xuanji and Zhou Xuanji with a palm. His black robe fluttered in the wind and he laughed arrogantly, "You are too weak." He grabbed with his right hand, and the three's divine energy was crushed by him. The explosion sent Zhou Xuanji and Hong Qin Great Lord flying backward. Zhou Xuanji immediately activated the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra to offset the impact. Following that, he used God's supreme speed and disappeared from the cardinal heaven's sight. Hong Qin Great Lord focused his eyes, and a blue current exploded from his body. It turned into a boundless ocean that covered the entire universe. Even the cardinal heaven experts were engulfed by the blue ocean. The beings who were fighting on both sides stopped and looked at Hong Qin Great Lord in fear. Imperishable stage. Child's play. The cardinal heaven laughed condescendingly. Just when he finished speaking, the blue ocean that covered the universe began to boil. The beings on the Sword Emperor Divine Court's side felt that their divine energy and magic energy had increased tremendously. Meanwhile, the soldiers under the cardinal heaven felt that their energy was being sucked away, which was extremely uncomfortable. Hong Qin Great Lord quickly came up to the cardinal heaven. He waved his fan, and the blue ocean surged up huge waves that engulfed the cardinal heaven experts. The cardinal heaven's expression changed a little. He thought to himself, "This guy's imperishable stage has become more powerful." No, it was not that Hong Qin Great Lord had become more powerful. It was just that he had become weaker after the previous battle. At the thought of this, the cardinal heaven's eyes turned even colder. Hong Qin Great Lord slashed down with his fan like a saber. Boom! A ray of blue light suddenly rose from the body of a cardinal heaven expert. Hong Qin Great Lord slashed open the cardinal heaven's chest. The blue radiance was the cardinal heaven's divine energy, which flowed out of his body uncontrollably. Body-shattering power. Just when the cardinal heaven was about to counterattack, Zhou Xuanji appeared behind him along with hundreds of greatly avatars. They were all using the Sword Emperor extinction technique. A horrifying explosion swept across everything. The cardinal heaven's figure was covered by the powerful light. This scene caused all the living beings in the Sword Emperor Divine Court to become excited. Was the cardinal heaven going to be defeated? What are you waiting for? Continue to fight. Sovereign Crimson Firmament raised his divine spear and roared furiously. His voice was extremely inciting, which made the blood of all the beings in the battle boil. The other four sovereigns led their armies in different directions. The cardinal heaven charged out from the powerful light and slammed his palm into Hong Qin Great Lord's abdomen. This slap blasted Hong Qin Great Lord's body apart. However, Hong Qin Great Lord quickly reconstructed his body. It was just that his complexion had turned pale. A demonic shadow with 3 heads and 8 arms appeared behind the cardinal heaven. It was extremely horrifying. It raised its 8 arms and joined its palms together. 8 black saber shadows slashed toward Zhou Xuanji simultaneously. Zhou Xuanji swung his sword again and blocked with his most powerful divine energy. The 2 divine energies clashed together, shattering the universe. Boundless space-time turbulence gushed in. Many beings could not dodge in time and were swept away. Zhou Xuanji quickly swung his swords, tearing apart the divine energy storm and charging toward the cardinal heaven. Thousands of legendary swords flew out from his body and attacked the cardinal heaven crazily. The cardinal heaven was pierced through by these legendary swords. All kinds of effects fell on him, making it difficult for him to resist. What's going on? These swords have a strange power, the cardinal heaven thought with a frown. He was shocked in his heart. He realized that he had underestimated Zhou Xuanji. The Constitution-defying creation scripture was something that even the cardinal heaven could not see through. After all, the history of the Constitution-defying creation scripture was even older than the cardinal heaven. It was a power that belonged to the very beginning. Hong Qin Great Lord was shocked. This power again? What is this power that can pierce through everything? He thought as he attacked. The blue ocean boiled and provided endless divine energy for Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji's attacks became more and more ferocious. His attacks caused the cardinal heaven's body to sway, and his attacks became faster and faster. He had become a target. Zhou Xuanji felt that it was strange. The cardinal heaven seemed to have become weaker. Chapter 994. Zhou Xuanji had been hunted down by a cardinal heaven cultivator before, so he still vividly remembered the aura of an enraged cardinal heaven cultivator. Compared to that time, the current Cardinal Heaven experts were much weaker. Could it be that a Cardinal Heaven expert was severely injured after that? That's right. The evil Emperor, Tang Xuanwu, and the others were not weaklings. Zhou Xuanji guessed as he attacked. The Cardinal Heaven expert seemed to have been completely defeated, but his aura did not weaken. Even though Hongqin Saint Monarch's undying realm was absorbing his god power, the sense of danger he gave off still didn't decrease. Interesting. Interesting. A Cardinal Heaven expert suddenly grinned and stopped abruptly. Dang. Dang. Clang. All the divine swords that landed on his body were deflected. He turned to look at Zhou Xuanji with a mocking expression. With a flip of his right hand, a pagoda appeared in his hand. He jumped directly into the tower, and in the next second he jumped out again. But this time his aura had completely changed. An extremely horrifying and domineering aura spread out, and Zhou Xuanji's expression changed drastically. He once again felt the horror of facing a Cardinal Heaven expert in the space-time kaleidoscope. What happened? Zhou Xuanji felt quite startled, and he suddenly thought of the venomous centipede on the training island. Could it be that a Cardinal Heaven expert had multiple bodies like the centipede? The sovereign heavenly flame was ferocious as it slammed its palm toward Zhou Xuanji. The two of them were hundreds of meters apart, and Zhou Xuanji could not even see the other party's divine power clearly. He felt as if his body had been pierced through, and all of his internal organs were injured. Even though his physical body was very strong, he couldn't withstand the power of a Cardinal Heaven expert. Before he could think further, a Cardinal Heaven expert appeared in front of him. He rotated his fists and punched him in the chest. In an instant, Zhou Xuanji's body exploded. Only his soul was left in front of a Cardinal Heaven expert. Powerful. Absolute power. Crush everything, tear everything to shreds. The Rainbow Qin Saint Lord's eyes widened in shock. Zhou Xuanji's body was very tough. How could he be blasted apart so easily? The Cardinal Heaven sneered and reached out to grab Zhou Xuanji's soul. Two fated fate pearls appeared in front of Zhou Xuanji. The violent gale was contained by the fated fate pearl, and Zhou Xuanji's body quickly recovered. His face was pale and there was fear in his eyes. At that moment he really had a horrifying feeling that he was about to die. The Rainbow Qin Saint Monarch also made a move. The blue ocean of the undying realm stirred up huge waves that slammed into the Cardinal Heaven realm from all directions. A Cardinal Heaven expert raised his hand and easily blocked Hongqin's Sacred Monarch's attack. The Cardinal Heaven Saint turned to look at Zhou Xuanji and said coldly, "Although I'm not sure what kind of inheritance you received, you have offended me. Moreover, it's the kind that I will not rest until you die. You must die." He came to Zhou Xuanji's head with a single step and smashed the pagoda down with his right hand. Zhou Xuanji sensed a horrifying suction force coming from the tower, which was about to suck him in. The two fated fate pearls protected him from this powerful suction force. The Rainbow Qin Sacred Lord executed a divine ability and wanted to move the Cardinal Heaven Sacred Lord away. However, his divine energy could not shake Zhou Xuanji at all. If this continued, the Sword Emperor Divine Court would definitely lose. Perhaps it would be difficult to determine the victor between the two armies, but if they were defeated, the living beings fighting below would also suffer misfortune. I can only rely on it. Zhou Xuanji recited the Constitution-defying creation scripture in his heart. The power of creation from the origin of all things strengthened his body continuously, helping him to resist the Cardinal Heaven's pressure. His condition changed, which made the Cardinal Heaven Saint narrow his eyes. This power seems familiar, the Cardinal Heaven thought to himself. Cardinal Heaven experts thought to themselves as a figure flashed across their minds. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. His eyes were filled with veins of blood as he sized Zhou Xuanji up. Waves of light emanated from his body like waves that shook the space. Hongqin's Sacred Lord stopped too. He was also stunned by Zhou Xuanji's condition. Zhou Xuanji's aura made him feel divine and majestic. This meant that Zhou Xuanji's energy technique was more profound than his Saint Rainbow Lord Dao. He could not help but fall into a daze. Could this brat really create a Dao technique more powerful than the Saint Rainbow Lord Dao? Zhou Xuanji looked calm, but he was a little shocked in his heart. It was his first time activating the Constitution-defying creation scripture with the fated fate pearls. At this moment, he even felt a sense of security that was as immovable as a mountain and indestructible. The Cardinal Heaven stopped and looked down at Zhou Xuanji. "What's your relationship with Hongmeng Heaven?" he asked. Zhou Xuanji looked up and replied, "I'm Hongmeng Heaven." There was nothing to hide about this. He already had a death grudge with Cardinal Heaven anyway. Although Cardinal Heaven and Hongmeng Heaven seemed to have many connections, they were actually mortal enemies. If one wanted to dominate the boundless universe, one had to eliminate all powerful enemies. Having heard this, the Cardinal Heaven's pupils contracted, and his expression changed. Zhou Xuanji did not stop the Constitution-defying creation scripture but waited for the Cardinal Heaven to attack. Eventually, the Cardinal Heaven did not attack again. He stepped back slowly and distanced himself from Zhou Xuanji. He let out a long roar and all living beings in the shattered universe stopped fighting. All of them were motionless as though they had been immobilized. Zhou Xuanji, let's fight another day. The Cardinal Heaven cried out with a deep voice. After that, he turned around and left. His soldiers looked at each other before disappearing into the depths of the universe with him. Zhou Xuanji frowned. He was not used to the Cardinal Heaven's sudden departure. Compared to this, he hoped that the Cardinal Heaven would kill him. The two of them were mortal enemies and he did not want to be involved in any other karma. Hong Qin's sacred lord flew up to him with a strange expression. Are you really Hongmeng Heaven? Hong Qin's sacred lord asked hesitantly. The legend of the post-primeval sovereign three heavens was known to everyone in the boundless universe. He had also grown up listening to this legend. Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and asked in return, is it very important? Hong Qin's sacred lord was silent. The Sword Emperor and the other great sovereigns flew over quickly, and so did the other generals. All of them looked excited. During the battle, they did not pay attention to the communication between Zhou Xuanji and the Cardinal Heaven. But since the Cardinal Heaven could retreat, it meant that they had won. Zhou Xuanji looked at all the great sovereigns and ordered, return and rest. After that, he waved his sleeves and brought Hong Qin's sacred lord away. He entered spiritless mode and headed toward the stars' territory. Zhou Xuanji's face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. Don't think too much. Hongmeng Heaven and Cardinal Heaven are not that close. It's just that your identity is special. He knew that he could not kill you even if he tried his best, so he retreated. Hong Qin's sacred lord saw through Zhou Xuanji's thoughts and comforted him. He paused for a moment before continuing, your growth is too fast, which is already a threat to him. Now that he has not recovered to his peak, he must have been greatly affected. So he retreated to cultivate. In the near future, the northern endless universe might welcome peace. Zhou Xuanji felt that it made sense. After all, the Cardinal Heaven only asked about his identity after attacking for a long time. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, it's good if it can be peaceful. We need time to develop. But I'm more worried about other threats. He had never forgotten someone. Hunyuan Heaven. Chapter 995. Zhou Xuanji and Hong Qin's Saint Lord returned before the news of their victory reached the stars' domain. They returned to their respective residences and began to recuperate. Zhou Xuanji's body had been destroyed by a Cardinal Heaven expert once, which injured his soul. He needed some time to recover. Soon, news of Zhou Xuanji and Hong Qin's Saint Lord repelling a Cardinal Heaven expert came back, which caused a huge commotion in all the domains of the Sword Dao divine ability. They did not know the details, but it was a fact that a Cardinal Heaven expert had retreated. Instantly, all the domains of the Sword Emperor Divine Court were in jubilation. Zhou Shaoxian barged into the Star's Palace and asked Zhou Xuanji if it was true. She had always felt that her father was the most talented, but she could not believe that he could fight against a Cardinal Heaven expert so quickly. It's not that exaggerated. It's just that he could not kill me. Moreover, he was injured before, so he chose to retreat in order to preserve his strength, Zhou Xuanji said, shaking his head with a smile. Having heard this, Zhou Shaoxian was still excited. She was familiar with the legends of the post-primeval sovereign three heavens. They were definitely the most powerful cultivators in the endless universe. Even legends could not kill Zhou Xuanji. How powerful was Zhou Xuanji? Zhou Xuanji saw through her thoughts and said unpleasantly, I'm not that powerful. If you don't cultivate well, you can only watch when I'm killed one day. Zhou Shaoxian stuck out her tongue and left excitedly. She was probably boasting to others again. Did I spoil this girl too much? Should I throw her into the training island? Zhou Xuanji thought as he rubbed his chin. He shook his head. It was just a thought. After that, he turned his attention back to the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra and the Fated Pearl. In the previous battle, the two powers fused together to block the Cardinal Heaven expert's attack. He was thinking that if he could perfectly fuse these two powers, wouldn't he be able to surpass Cardinal Heaven? He could not help but think of the owner of the boundless fire god, the ancient sovereign. At that time the universe was very small, but that sovereign had power that surpassed the legends of today. It was really incredible. Zhou Xuanji thought as he took out the faded pearl. In the void of the universe, a cardinal heaven and a blurry figure stood opposite each other. Hong Meng Heaven has already reincarnated? The blurry figure asked with a grave tone. Cardinal Heaven nodded and said, his aptitude and luck are even more terrifying than before he reincarnated. He has a powerful treasure on him, so even if he only has the cultivation of an 8-court supreme, I can't kill him. As he said this, his expression was very ugly. Isn't this a good thing? With the 3 of us gathered, we can teach our juniors a lesson. We'll tell them how mighty we were back then. The blurry figure calmly replied. He was Hunyuan Heaven. Cardinal Heaven experts gritted their teeth and said, he is my enemy. Hunyuan Tian waved his hand and said, tell him to go to the east or west. If that doesn't work, you can go. In any case, you can't take down the north. Upon hearing this, the Cardinal Heaven expert's face turned even uglier. After thousands of years, he didn't even control half of the northern limitless realm. How ironic. Let's just leave it at that. I'm about to dominate the southern endless lands. The juniors here are very difficult to deal with. Their strength is about to catch up to us at our peak. With these words, Hunyuan Heaven vanished from the spot. Cardinal Heaven experts took a deep breath and tried hard to adjust their emotions. He turned around, turned into black smoke and disappeared. After the battle between Zhou Xuanji and Sovereign Heaven, the Northern Territory welcomed peace. The Sword Emperor Divine Court became the only faction that wasn't invaded by Cardinal Heaven factions. More and more life forms joined the Sword Emperor Divine Court. Zhou Xuanji would select some great sovereigns every once in a while. He had set up 12 Divine Lords, 36 Court Sovereigns, and 108 Great Generals of the Divine Court. The Divine Court Great General commanded an army of over 100 million, while Ting Zun commanded the Divine Court Great General. The 12 Divine Sovereigns were all existences that were extremely close to the imperishable realm. Each of them was a person of virtue and prestige. Hong Qin Sacred Monarch was also one of the 12 Divine Monarchs. The creation of various deity positions caused the cohesion of the Sword Emperor Divine Court to gradually increase. Zhou Xuanji had Yuan Qing guide everyone's fate in various domains and court realms. Yuan Qing had his subordinates spread the stories of the Divine Lords, Court Sovereigns, and Great Generals of the Divine Court to strengthen their fate and connect them closely with the people of the Sword Emperor Divine Court. If this continued, the God Monarchs would become stronger and stronger. However, they would not be able to cut off the Sword Emperor Divine Court. There are pros and cons. Of course, Zhou Xuanji was the one who was affected the most. He didn't reject it and used the fated bead to suppress his luck. For a time, the spirit qi in all the domains that belonged to the Sword Dao divine ability was increasing. Peace had arrived. Everyone worked hard to cultivate. Why did Zhou Xuanji not let their guard down and promote the superstar competition again? Yuan Qing did it himself. When the rules of the superstar competition were passed down, all the domains were in an uproar. All the geniuses were rubbing their palms. Seeing that the environment inside the Sword Dao divine ability had stabilized, Zhou Xuanji let Zhou Tianyuan out to explore. Maybe this kid could pass on his bloodline. On this day, Zhou Xuanji helped Jianghu break through. Jianghu had already become the sovereign of laws. She was getting closer and closer to great sovereign. Xian Xianghua had long become a great sovereign. After all, her exterminating divine eyes were connected to Zhou Xuanji's exterminating divine eyes. Just the sovereign of laws is already so powerful. How strong is a great sovereign? Jianghu opened her eyes and sighed. Her eyes were filled with excitement, but she was very restrained. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, when you get used to it, you will yearn for a higher realm. Even a great sovereign will be the same. Humans were like this. Sometimes, greed was also a kind of motivation. Jianghu nodded and said, Sister Xian has established the Tanhua sect and is heading to the edge of the divine court. Do you need to pay attention to it? After all, the Cardinal Heaven hasn't been defeated yet. Zhou Xuanji replied, don't worry, I can see her. The Sword Emperor Divine Court needs 100 flowers to bloom. Let her join. The more sects there were, the more paths of cultivation there would be. After all, there was no master-disciple relationship. Who would be willing to pass on their skills? Jianghu nodded. She felt that it made sense. She was just worried that Xian Xianghua would be in danger. But since Zhou Xuanji had been paying attention to Xian Xianghua, she was relieved. Why don't we let little Xian go out and establish a sect? I always feel that she has no goal now. She is very lazy, Jianghu suggested. Zhou Xuanji thought about it and said, okay, but don't let her spread it. I don't want her to use my name. What he meant was that he could teach his sword techniques. Jianghu smiled and immediately disappeared from the hall. Zhou Xuanji thought of Zhou Tanhua again. With a wave of his right hand, he directly moved the kid to the hall. Zhou Tanhua was still meditating. He opened his eyes subconsciously and was stunned to see Zhou Xuanji. He quickly got up and was about to salute. But Zhou Xuanji directly spoke and expressed his thoughts. He hoped that Zhou Tanhua would also go and establish a sect. Zhou Tanhua furrowed his brow and said, I am not interested in power. But now, if I tell you to go, then go. What are you planning by staying in the mansion and cultivating every day? Zhou Xuanji rebuked, glaring at him. Chapter 996. The future Sword Emperor Divine Court will definitely be huge and complicated. I want you to establish a sect so that you can enter the lowest level of the Divine Court and see the suffering of the masses on my behalf. Zhou Xuanji stared at Zhou Tanhua and said seriously. He did not wish for his descendants to gather at the peak of the Sword Emperor Divine Court in the future. If there came a day when he was no longer around, his descendants might be replaced by someone else. This kind of lesson was common in the mortal world. It could almost be said to be a historical law. Zhou Tanhua said helplessly, well, I'm only responsible for establishing the sect. I'm not responsible for leading the sect to prosperity, okay? He heard the word you in Zhou Xuanji's words. It seemed that his sister had also been given this mission. He knew that Zhou Shaoxian would be very excited. She was in charge of strength and he was in charge of inheritance. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, get ready. You can go at any time. Remember, don't tell others that you are my son. Zhou Tanhua understood what he meant and got up. Zhou Xuanji waved his hand and sent his son away. This boy's personality is quite steady. No wonder he was born when my Dao heart was as calm as water, Zhou Xuanji said as he shook his head and smiled. Every time he saw Zhou Tanhua he would want to tease this kid. Then he closed his eyes and began to cultivate. After the northern lands achieved peace, Cardinal Heaven also settled down. It was frighteningly calm. Zhou Xuanji would occasionally wander around the Sword Emperor Divine Court to see how his subordinates were doing. His days were becoming more and more stable. Although it wasn't exciting, he still enjoyed it. They couldn't just keep on fighting and killing. Suddenly one day, he realized that speechlessness had disappeared. He asked Yuan Cheng and Jin Qing, but neither of them knew where he had gone. Your Highness, that brat is a member of the East Endless Kingdom's royal family. Previously, when the North Endless Kingdom was in chaos, he came. Now that the North Endless Kingdom is at peace, he has left. I'm afraid there's something fishy going on. Yuan Qing said meaningfully. He had never been able to see through speechless, so he was wary of him. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. Back then, when he had dealt with Shen Yanxing, the East Endless Royal Clan had helped. At that time, Shen Yanxing was Hongmeng Heaven. Now Hongmeng Heaven was Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji couldn't help but think more. Jin Qing nodded and said, he has always been very strange. He doesn't like to interact with people, but he likes to inquire about the authority of the various heavenly officials, causing many people to have objections. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, continue to recruit soldiers and send them to the various corners of the Divine Court. Also, pay attention to the space-time turbulence. Jin Qing cupped his fists and accepted the order. Zhou Xuanji looked at Yuan Cheng and said, the training island has been moved to the side of Long Tsong's territory. Go take a look and check it. I don't want Cardinal Heaven to interfere. Yuan Qing nodded. You may leave. Even though it's peaceful now, danger still exists. Don't forget to cultivate. Also, pick 10,000 geniuses with outstanding talent from each domain. I will personally teach them the Tao, Zhou Xuanji said as he waved his hand, indicating that they could leave. Preach the Tao? The two of them immediately became excited. Now, Zhou Xuanji's preaching of the Tao was a popular topic in the Stars realm. If he could personally preach the Tao, it would be a good thing for the Sword Emperor Divine Court's future. Under the red clouds on a floating island, Wu Yen stood under the tree, and in front of him sat the leader of the Eastern Endless Kingdom, Zhongji. Zhongji waved his fan and said with a smile, from what you said, you seem to be very satisfied with Zhou Xuanji and have great expectations for him. Wu Yen nodded and said, he's a Hongmeng Heaven, but I feel that he can surpass the previous generations of Hongmeng Heavens. Zhongji looked at him in astonishment. He did not expect him to have such a high evaluation of Zhou Xuanji. Then what do you want to tell me this time? Zhongji asked casually as he lifted the small wine flask on the stone table. Wu Yan replied, I want to ask you what your plan is for him so that you can choose your own heart. Zhongji raised his brow and the smile on his face disappeared. He glanced at Wu Yan and said meaningfully, Wu Yan, I gave you your name and I gave you your life. Are you going to abandon me and leave? I can get someone else to help Zhou Xuanji. Do you believe that Zhou Xuanji won't think about you? Facing his master's threat, Wu Yan was still very calm. No matter who you get, they will not be able to control him, Wu Yan said calmly. He hid some things from Zhongji such as Wu Yan Fire God. Wu Yan Fire God's background was even greater than the Eastern Boundless Royal Clan. He felt that this would be a variable for Zhou Xuanji. And a variable for him as well. He preferred to be Zhou Xuanji's subordinate instead of being Zhongji's puppet. You need to polish yourself, Zhongji said with a smile. He waved his hand and stored Wu Yan away. His face turned cold as he snorted coldly, Hongmeng Heaven. You want to surpass Hongmeng Heaven? You overestimate yourself. After that, he got up slowly and looked toward the horizon. It's time for the royal clan to come out. The Eastern Boundless World should be unified by me. Zhongji said in high spirits with a smile on his face. Star's Palace. Zhou Xuanji walked toward his throne slowly. He looked a little tired. He had just preached the ancestral voice to hundreds of thousands of geniuses. He even activated the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra to enhance its effect. It had to be said that this consumed a lot of his mental energy. It was as though he had fought a powerful enemy. What kind of divine ability have you mastered? A Cardinal Heaven's voice came from behind Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji looked back. Why is this guy here? He frowned and went on the defensive. The Cardinal Heaven expert, who was still wearing the black robe, said softly, Don't be nervous. I'm not here to deal with you. We both belong to the North Limitless Realm. We have to deal with the outside world first before fighting internally. He began to size up Star's Hall. What do you mean? The other three factions are preparing to deal with us? Zhou Xuanji asked. Although he didn't like Cardinal Heaven experts, he was still far-sighted. That's right, Guju Jiao of the Western Boundless Land has already begun to mobilize his army and is preparing to break through the lawless region and kill his way into the Northern Boundless Land. You've captured his son, so he wants to use this opportunity to swallow up the Northern Boundless Land and the Eastern Boundless Land, said Cardinal Heaven with a faint smile. Having heard this, Zhou Xuanji's expression changed. Gu Juejiu already knew about Gu Tianlin? He thought that he had fooled them flawlessly. I'll deal with Gu Juejiu. You deal with the Eastern Endless Royal Family. His sharp eyes locked onto Zhou Xuanji. The Eastern Endless Royal Family had also come? Zhou Xuanji frowned. Why did both sides attack at the same time? He couldn't help but think about Wu Yan. Could Wu Yan's disappearance be related to today's chaos? The Cardinal Heaven continued to speak. I have yet to recover my power. The North Limitless Realm is very weak now. I need your power. If I lose, you will face an even more powerful enemy. After we wipe out the enemies and reach our pinnacle, we will fight to the death. How about that? Zhou Xuanji nodded slowly and said, Okay. I agree. He didn't doubt that the Cardinal Heaven would lie. He had expected it. The Cardinal Heaven smiled and said, I didn't misjudge you. Get ready. I will use my training island to inform you. After saying that, he disappeared. Training island? Zhou Xuanji's face twitched. This guy was still hiding something. Chapter 997. Zhou Xuanji called over the 5 sword emperors, 12 divine lords, 36 court sovereigns Yuan Cheng and Jin Cheng. He told them about how the Cardinal Heaven experts had sought him out to form an alliance. There was an uproar in the hall. East Endless and West Endless want to deal with us? Damn it, kill them. It's finally peaceful, and now there's going to be a war. As expected, the chaos of war isn't limited to our boundless north. The other 3 boundless realms all have ulterior motives. A great era is truly coming. Who knows, there might even be someone who can dominate the 4 boundless realms, someone who can stand shoulder to shoulder with the primes. That's definitely our Lord, the Sword Emperor. His aptitude is unparalleled. The divine officials began to discuss, and the topic soon turned into flattering Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji smiled and raised his hand as he said, We're going to attack Eastern Infinity, What do you guys think? Yuan Qing took a step forward and said, we can publicize this matter and use this opportunity to expand the Sword Emperor Divine Court's strength. At the same time, we can increase our chances of victory. His opinion was approved by all. Regardless of how they felt before joining the Sword Emperor Divine Court, they now had to consider the Sword Emperor Divine Court. They were bound together for good or bad. I'll leave this matter to you. The 36 High Court Masters can mobilize their troops and head towards the border of the Endless East to build the teleportation formation. Zhou Xuanji began to make arrangements. He did not feel any psychological burden towards Dong Wujin. Although he had received help from the Eastern Infinity Royal family, Wordless had already left. Just nice, he wanted to ask what the Eastern Endless Royal family meant. He felt that something was amiss. If it was because of the war, there was no need to transfer Speechless away. Speechless could also stay behind to persuade them. Perhaps the disappearance of Wordless was due to another contradiction. After the time it took for a joss stick to burn, the news of the endless battle had spread throughout the Myriad Stars domain and spread to other domains. None of the living beings were afraid of this, because they had been cultivating with the goal of war as their goal. After cultivating for so long, many geniuses were waiting to shine on the battlefield and shine brightly in the Sword Emperor Divine Court. For a time, even the creatures who weren't chosen as court soldiers rushed towards the northern boundless border. Zhou Xuanji was waiting in the Stars Hall. He called Shen Yinxing over. Shen Yinxing rubbed her fists and sneered, very good, I've been waiting for this opportunity. Let me kill Zhongji. The son will pay his father's debts. Her face was full of murderous intent. When she recalled the battle that year, she gnashed her teeth in hatred. Zhou Xuanji nodded and asked, how many imperishable stage cultivators does the Eastern Endless Kingdom have? Now, the standard by which he measured the strength of a force was the number of imperishable realm powerhouses. There are a lot of them. The royal family is still standing. Who knows how many old things are hidden inside? Shen Yinxing shrugged and replied. Seeing her nonchalant expression, Zhou Xuanji teased, why? Are you strong enough to ignore how many undying realm experts are there? Shen Yinxing rolled her eyes at him and said, what can I do? Don't tell me you can turn into many imperishable realm experts? Right now, the Northern Limitless Kingdom is already inferior to the Eastern Limitless Kingdom, let alone the Western Limitless Kingdom. Previously, the Cardinal Heaven experts killed too many of the Northern Limitless Kingdom's experts. Now they're reaping what they sowed. She had a mocking smile on her face and seemed to be very happy. Zhou Xuanji shook his head with a smile and said, then go and prepare. The East Boundless Kingdom will arrive soon. Shen Yinxing nodded and turned to leave. When there was no one else in the hall, Zhou Xuanji took out the fate bead again. After a long period of practice, he was already able to easily fuse the fated pearl and the constitution-defying creation scripture. He had an idea. That was to integrate the fated pearl into the sword and drive it with the sword, erupting with the greatest power. But his legendary swords couldn't bear the power of the fated pearl at all. This gave him a headache. Wait, the sword might not be a real sword. Zhou Xuanji suddenly had an idea. He immediately used the sword fusion technique and condensed a sword of light with his divine energy. Under the command of his will, the two fated pearls drilled into the sword of light. Boom! The sword of light exploded, and Zhou Xuanji was almost overturned. The entire Star Hall was also shaking violently. It could collapse at any time. Fortunately, he had reinforced the Star Hall, isolating it from time and space. From the outside, the Star Hall was motionless. No, I have to take it slow, Zhou Xuanji murmured. He wasn't discouraged. Instead, he was in high spirits. He felt that this method was feasible. Once it succeeded, it would be a divine ability more powerful than the Sword Emperor Absolute. After all, even Cardinal Heaven experts couldn't break the fated pearl. Thinking of this, he closed his eyes and began to contemplate. In the next 10 years, the Sword Emperor Divine Court and the Cardinal Heaven forces began to set up defenses. The news of the war spread throughout the North Boundless Realm. Countless life forms flocked to the Sword Emperor Divine Court, and there were also people who joined the Paragon Heaven banner. However, the number of people joining the Sword Emperor Divine Court was far less. The Sword Emperor was like the sun in the sky, while a Cardinal Heaven expert was like a demon that could destroy the world. It was an easy choice. 5 years later, the war began. Zhou Xuanji received news that the Eastern Boundless Royal Clan had charged out from tens of thousands of space-time holes, wanting to take advantage of the chaos and charge into the inner regions of the Northern Boundless Kingdom. Zhou Xuanji created 100,000 doppelgangers and sent them to various battlefields to monitor the situation. He didn't make a move himself. Instead, he continued to study the divine art. The Sword Emperor Divine Court was strong enough, so it wouldn't be directly destroyed. Moreover, the spirit chi of each endless universe was different. The living beings of the East Endless Universe would not be able to adapt to the North Endless Universe, and their battle strength would be greatly reduced. It was the same for the living beings of the North Endless Universe if they went to the East Endless Universe. This was why the four directions had been able to coexist in peace for countless years. This was also the reason why no one could unify the four directions. It was a pity that on the seventh day of the battle, Zhou Xuanji had to move. 10 imperishable stage cultivators appeared at the front line. They worked together to fight against Rainbow Qin Saint and a Divine Lord. The situation was dire. Zhou Xuanji activated the godly void state and rushed to the battlefield. In the Crimson Universe, space-time cracks were everywhere. Countless corpses floated in the air. The explosions caused by the divine arts were like fireworks. It was extremely spectacular. Rainbow Qin Saint and the Divine Lord were surrounded and attacked by 10 figures in red robes. These figures were all in the shape of men. Their faces looked similar as though they were twins. Zhou Xuanji immediately took out the suppressive sword and charged forward. Humph! He snorted coldly as a silver radiance radiated from the surface of his body. His aura grew tremendously, shaking the surrounding starry sky. He raised the suppressive sword and slashed forward. The dazzling sword light shook the Crimson Universe. The 10 imperishable stage cultivators raised their right hands at the same time. Their divine energy fused together and created a gigantic barrier to block Zhou Xuanji's sword chi. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. He couldn't absorb his opponent's divine energy. On the contrary, his divine energy was being absorbed by his opponent. Interesting. He dashed forward swiftly and activated the Sword Emperor Absolute Technique. Boom. The 10 imperishable stage cultivators were already affected by the spiritual chi in the Northern Territories. Under the situation where Rainbow Qin Saint and the Divine Lord were restrained, they couldn't block the Sword Emperor Absolute Technique easily. Their bodies swayed and scattered immediately. Rainbow Qin Saint and the Divine Lord immediately moved to Zhou Xuanji's side. Their faces were pale. Clearly they were severely injured even to the core. Chapter 998. You are the Sword Emperor? An immortal cultivator asked coldly. His sharp gaze fell on Zhou Xuanji as if he wanted to see through him. Zhou Xuanji gave a smile that did not seem like a smile as he asked, You are from the Eastern Endless Royal Clan? Where is your patriarch Zongji? Zongji. On the surface, he was the strongest expert in the Eastern Endless Continent, comparable to the ancient peerless geniuses. However, Gu Juejiu was even more famous. He was hailed as the most promising existence to surpass Gu Zun 3 heavens. He was also the most likely existence to unify the four directions. Dealing with the likes of you is not worthy of my patriarch's hand. Another imperishable snorted. As his voice fell, the 10 imperishable experts raised their hands at the same time. Boom. They emitted a dazzling light, and their bodies quickly merged together to form a stalwart figure. Was this a fusion? Zhou Xuanji's gaze was strange, but he did not panic. Instead, he took a step forward. I'll let you guys have a taste of my new divine ability. He smiled proudly and raised his right hand. The oppressive divine sword shone with silver light. The light stretched and it was incomparably divine. Hong Qin Saint Monarch and Sir God felt his aura and their expressions changed. My lord, this aura, the Divine Lord said with a trembling voice. He could not even complete his sentence. Hong Qin Lord couldn't help but reveal a look of anticipation when he recalled the previous battle with a Cardinal Heaven expert. He must have become stronger. Zhou Xuanji quickly fused a faded fate pearl into the Sword of Light. At the same time, his soul was chanting the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra to help him maintain the sword. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead, and the light on his body began to flicker, as if it could be extinguished at any moment. Sword Emperor. Remember, the one who killed you is our 10-aspect Divine Luo. The 10 imperishable realm experts roared, their might shaking the universe. The living beings who were fighting all turned around and gasped when they saw his silhouette. What a terrifying aura. 10 aspects Divine Luo did not reveal his true face. His whole body exuded a scorching red light. He raised his hands and a large blade condensed in his hands. He directly rushed towards Zhou Xuanji. The terrifying figure, which was several million zhang tall, was extremely frightening when it sprinted. Zhou Xuanji's expression did not change. He put down the sword of light and furiously roared as he slashed out. Bang! A strong light flashed and all living beings subconsciously closed their eyes. An indescribably terrifying pressure enveloped all the creatures, making them feel as if they were in a cold cellar. Their souls were suffering from extreme torment, as if they could explode at any moment. Even Qin Xingjun, who was as strong as a rainbow, was shuddering in fear at this moment, unable to open his eyes. Numerous shrill cries sounded out in succession, adding a sense of horror to the battlefield. After the radiance faded, Zhou Xuanji could not help but vomit a mouthful of blood. This sword almost sucked him dry. He looked over but could no longer see the figure of 10 aspects Divine Luo. Hiss! Hong Qin's sacred monarch and divine monarch gasped. They knew that Zhou Xuanji was very powerful, but they did not expect him to be so powerful that he could kill 10 immortal cultivators with a single strike. Indestructible. This realm represented immortality and indestructibility. Logically speaking, no matter how strong one's power was, it was impossible to destroy both their bodies and souls. They could not understand how Zhou Xuanji did it. Zhou Xuanji was expressionless, but he was pleasantly surprised in his heart. The fated Fate Pearl's power had indeed surpassed the imperishable level. Not only the fated pearl but also the constitution-defying creation scripture. This was a powerful cultivation technique that had appeared before the birth of the boundless universe. Zhou Xuanji turned around and looked at the dumbfounded Eastern Infinity cultivators and cried, "Those who surrender will be spared." As soon as he spoke, many cultivators began to flee. Zhou Xuanji gave Hong Qin's sacred monarch and divine monarch a look, and the two immediately understood. Zhou Xuanji activated the spiritless state and quickly flew back to the Star Hall to recuperate. Wah! The battlefield was in an uproar. Too powerful. Our Sword Emperor is invincible. No wonder Cardinal Heaven was willing to share Northern Infinity with him. Haha, I told you. Eastern Infinity can't even fight their way in. I heard that the Sword Emperor is only 10,000 years old? 10,000 years old? Impossible. You can't reach this level of power even if you're 100 billion years old. No matter what, our Sword Emperor Divine Court will definitely reach the pinnacle under his leadership. After returning to the Star Hall, Zhou Xuanji sat down to recuperate his aura. He felt a little regretful. If that strike contained world internalization, wouldn't his cultivation soar? It was a pity that he couldn't use the profound meaning of world internalization in that strike. What should I call this strike? Zhou Xuanji pondered as he recuperated. Just as he was thinking, the news of him killing 10 Xiangshan Luo began to spread. First, it spread to every battlefield. On the Sword Emperor Divine Court's side, everyone who heard it felt their blood boiling. The Eastern Infinity cultivators were shocked. 10 Xiangshan Luo was a legend in Eastern Infinity. His status was even higher than Hong Qin's sacred monarchs in Northern Infinity. Such a powerful cultivator was killed instantly by the Sword Emperor? How could it be? Their first reaction was disbelief. But when their own spies came back with the news, they were all frightened out of their wits. Immediately, the Sword Emperor's fame spread far and wide. The news reached the Cardinal Heaven's ears. Sitting in the palanquin, he couldn't help but frown and mumble, "This brat is already so powerful? Impossible." He had heard of 10 Xiangshan Luo's power. Eastern Infinity sending 10 Xiangshan Luo already showed his determination. He began to calculate with his fingers. The next second, his frown deepened. How did he do it? Could it be that he has already awakened the power of his previous life? Cardinal Heaven experts had complicated expressions on their faces. There was unwillingness, shock, regret, and anger. He viewed Hong Meng Heaven as his lifelong enemy. How could he allow Hong Meng Heaven to surpass him? However, he had no choice. Right now, the more powerful Zhou Xuanji was, the better it was for him. In the end, he could only let out a sigh. Sigh. In the endless east, under the scarlet sky, Zhongji and Bainzi sat opposite each other. How long will it take for your royal family to seize the northern limitless territory? Bainzi asked. Zhongji replied with a smile, "It depends on how weak Bei Wujin is right now. I've sent out 10 aspect Shenluo. Unless a Cardinal Heaven expert personally takes action, it will be very difficult to defeat 10 aspect Shenluo. After all, the demonic emperor, Tang Xuanwu, and other experts were all wiped out by a Cardinal Heaven expert." Bainzi narrowed his eyes and lamented, Even 10 aspects Shenluo was sent out. How ruthless. He changed the topic and said, after this is done, don't forget the agreement between you and our lawless zone. I need information on the lawless fire god. No fire god. Hearing this name, Zhongji's eyelids twitched slightly. He smiled and said, don't worry, once there is news I will inform you immediately. By the way, how did no fire god escape? Bainzi shook his head and sighed, this incident alarmed our Saint Altar. You should know that guy's power. It would be fine if he was in the lawless zone, but I'm afraid that he has already escaped into the endless universe. Zhongji frowned. He began to worry that no fire god had already sneaked into Eastern Infinity. If that was the case, it would be extremely disadvantageous for the upcoming war. At this moment, a figure appeared beside them and half knelt. Report. 10 aspect Shenluo has fallen in battle. The person said in a deep voice, sounding a little panicked. Chapter 999. 10 Shenluo had fallen. Zhongji and Bainzi heard this and their expressions changed drastically. How could it be? Zhongji slammed the table and cried out with a deep voice, speak! Who killed him? Could it be a Cardinal Heaven? Wasn't a Cardinal Heaven heavily injured and had yet to recover? It's the Sword Emperor. The Sword Emperor killed 10 Shenluo instantly with just one slash. Over 100 million soldiers have been captured. The informant replied with gritted teeth. His body was trembling as he spoke. Within Eastern Boundless, everyone thought that it was a sure thing to swallow up Northern Boundless. But it was a bad start. That was 10 Shenluo. Sword Emperor. Is he that powerful? Bainzi asked with a frown. He had also paid attention to Zhou Xuanji, the new overlord of Northern Boundless. To him, Zhou Xuanji was too young. He might not even be able to protect his Sword Emperor Divine Court. How could he kill 10 Shenluo? Someone must have done it secretly. Not only him but Zhongji thought so too. Leave. Zhongji waved his hand and said with an unsightly expression. Previously he promised to take down Northern Boundless to see how weak Northern Boundless was. Now his face was swollen. After the informant disappeared, Zhongji fell into silence. Bainzi got up and said with a mocking smile, it seems like the royal family has not come out for a long time. After that, Bainzi disappeared. Zhongji poured himself a cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. He took a deep breath and said faintly, Sword Emperor, you can do it. No matter who is supporting you, I will take down Northern Boundless. In the Star Palace, Zhou Xuanji did not know that Zhongji and Cardinal Heaven were shocked by his battle achievement. He was still recuperating. He decided to call the slash he used against 10 Shenluo Annihilation Judgment. Using Annihilation Judgment consumed a lot of his energy. He was considering how to reduce the consumption of this divine ability. If he could use Annihilation Judgment continuously, it would be perfect. At this moment he sensed someone outside the palace. With a thought, that person appeared in the palace. Sovereign Hongqian. She took 2 steps forward and asked, did you really kill 10 Shenluo by yourself? Zhou Xuanji looked up at her and asked, why? A lie? Could it be that everyone thought he was boasting? Countless living beings on the battlefield could see it clearly. No, I just want to confirm something. When I received the inheritance in the Graveyard of Gods, I saw the 10 aspect deity Luo in the inherited memories of the Kunlun 5 permanents. The 10 aspect deity Luo doesn't refer to them. It is also a kind of inheritance. In other words, the 10 aspect deity Luo isn't just the 10 you killed. Autarch Crimson Dust said seriously, a hint of worry in her eyes. Zhou Xuanji understood her meaning. It was likely that the previous generation's 10 aspects divine Luo would come to find trouble with him. Don't worry, this is unavoidable, Zhou Xuanji said as he shook his head. He did not panic. Once he was done creating the Annihilation Judgment, he wouldn't be afraid of any strong enemy. Seeing how calm he was, Crimson Dust understood that he was confident. Let me give you a word of advice. I'm going to the front lines as well. I can't always enjoy your care, Autarch Crimson Dust said with a nod, then turned and left. Zhou Xuanji did not stop him. Mortal Sovereign was very independent. He had experienced war before. This was also good, at least it could make her feel at ease. Zhou Xuanji closed his eyes and began comprehending the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra. Although the Constitution-defying Creation Sutra was not divided into realms, it gave Zhou Xuanji an unfathomable feeling. It was as if there were endless mysteries waiting for him to discover. Ottar Crimson Dust's words gave him a sudden idea. Inheritance. Would there be an inheritance in the Constitution defying Creation Sutra? After all, this was a supreme energy technique or divine ability that was born before the endless universe. It was still uncertain whether the Constitution defying Creation Sutra was created by the Fire God Lord. Maybe it had a longer history. It might even be related to the origin of all of this. And so, Zhou Xuanji began to revise the Constitution defying Creation Sutra again and again. Within the chaotic domain of the universe, countless living beings stood in rows, preparing for battle. They held the cardinal heaven flag in their hands, and excitement was written all over their faces. With a legend leading them, they had no fear for the upcoming war but only anticipation and excitement. Behind the boundless army, the cardinal heaven stood proudly on the top of the tower, waiting for the arrival of the enemy. Suddenly, a massive black hole appeared in the chaotic space in front of them. Space-time lightning lingered at the edge of the black hole. Horrifying giant demons flew out of the black hole. They were in different shapes and had powerful auras. Behind them was an uncountable army of living beings. Ah, Cardinal Heaven. I wanted to challenge you for a long time. The person who defeated you today is called Ancient Jianghu. I will surpass your post-ancient sovereign 3 heavens and become the next ancient sovereign. A wild and domineering voice came, impacting the hearts of all the Cardinal Heaven's subordinates. A powerful aura enveloped the chaotic universe. The war is here. The Cardinal Heaven laughed mockingly. Who do you think you are? You think you can stand shoulder to shoulder with Ancient Jianghu just because your surname is Gu? Then I'm the Origin Lord. He immediately waved his hand, and the entire army charged forward with a roar. Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes suddenly and frowned. This aura, he mumbled to himself. His eyes were filled with shock. He immediately thought of a name. Ancient Jianghu. So powerful. Such an aura was even more powerful than that of the fire god. Even a Cardinal Heaven did not give off such a horrifying aura. He frowned and began to worry about the Cardinal Heaven. Could the current Cardinal Heaven really defeat Ancient Jianghu? He did not want to be pincered by Ancient Jianghu and Zhongji. If that happened, he would die a horrible death. I need to hurry up and become more powerful. Zhou Xuanji closed his eyes. Recently, he had vaguely grasped the inheritance in the unconstitutional Creation Sutra. There seemed to be something hidden in the ancestral voice of the unconstitutional Creation Sutra. He could grasp it occasionally, but it would slip away whenever he did. The more it was so, the more he wanted to understand it. 6 days later, Yuan Qing appeared outside the Star Hall. Zhou Xuanji let him in. My lord, the Cardinal Heaven and Ancient Jianghu are fighting, Yuan Qing said worriedly. Zhou Xuanji frowned and asked, why? Is the situation not good? Yuan Qing replied, Ancient Jianghu was very powerful at the beginning and suppressed the Cardinal Heaven with ease. But when the Cardinal Heaven was about to be defeated, he went into his tower. Next, a powerful Cardinal Heaven that was not inferior to Ancient Jianghu came out. The two fought to the point where they were both injured and had to stop. Zhou Xuanji relaxed his brows. Wasn't this a good thing? He was afraid that the Cardinal Heaven would be defeated. Such a powerful Cardinal Heaven must be plotting something for them to allow us to develop. Yuan Qing expressed his concern. He was worried that the Cardinal Heaven would target them in the future. Zhou Xuanji said calmly, let's talk about the future in the future. If we can defeat East Wujin, the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. As for the Cardinal Heaven, let me deal with him. Seeing that he was so confident, Yuan Qing became excited immediately. Yuan Qing continued, there's one more thing. I heard from the captive that Wu Yin was crippled by Zhongji. No one knows if he's dead or alive. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.